Chapter 334. Hearing him call out her name so easily, the female bandit Sister Guan was startled. Her gaze was like a knife cutting into Fan Xian. Her left hand tightly clutched the wound on her broken hand. Viciously she said, "Today I fell into your hands. I wonder what your name is." Fan Xian sat on the chair and picked at his ear as if he did not feel the other party's venomous gaze. He smiled and said, "I am the master and you are the thief. What right do you have to ask about my background?" Guan Wumei felt an unbearable throbbing pain in her right hand. Looking at her broken wrist, her face paled. She knew she had bumped into an iron plate today. Still clenching her teeth, she said, "Please tell me the truth." Fan Xian glanced at her with amusement. He felt this matter was truly absurd. His group had only been delayed by something. He had not expected the ship to be so fragrant. In just one day, it had attracted a famous female bandit in Yingzhou. After the female bandit in front of him had been captured, not only was she not afraid, but she had asked him to tell her the way. Tell what way? Fan Xian dipped his finger in some cold tea and carefully smeared it between his brows. Raising his eyebrows, he said, "The way of the sun, the way of the human, and the way of the ghost?" The curtain behind him moved slightly. Wearing a large cotton jacket, Cece rubbed her sore eyes and walked out in a daze. Muttering, she said, "Young master, why did you get up?" She was dazzled by the light in the hall, and it took her a while to clearly see the scene in the hall. When her gaze fell on Sister Guan's severed hand, she couldn't help but scream at the horrifying bloody scene. Halfway through her scream, Fan Xian had already covered her mouth with his hand and laughed mockingly. "You want to wake up everyone in Yingzhou?" From Danzhou to Jingdou, the bloodiest scene Cece had seen was when the second young master of the Fan family, Brother Xijia, had been attacked. She had never seen a broken hand or a broken leg. She was so shocked that her entire body trembled and couldn't calm down for a moment. Fan Xian pinched her waist and said, "Go back to sleep. We have business to do." Cece couldn't resist glancing at Guan Wumei again. She made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to return to the room. "Is he awake?" "No," Cece continued. "Mr. Shi doesn't seem to be awake either. Once Xiao Shi sleeps, he sleeps like a pig. Back then, when I made a ruckus, that place, he only knew to hug the flower girl to sleep. How would he know what was happening outside?" At this moment, Guan Wumei was in so much pain that the corners of her mouth were twitching, and her face had turned green. However, her ears had clearly heard the conversation between the young man and his servant girl, and she felt increasingly strange and astonished. Who exactly were these people on this ship? After being attacked by the mountain bandits at night, he was still so calm and composed and even had the leisure to chat. If it wasn't because he was extremely confident, then he was a little stupid. Of course, she now believed that the former was more likely, but she didn't know how he would deal with them. In a quiet voice he said, "Guan Wumei from Ezhou in the Jiangbei Road. Her father was Guan Heshan, and her mother was Xia. She lived in poverty as a child and was sold into a brothel. Later, she changed hands and became the concubine of a master in Ezhou. Because she could not bear the humiliation of her mistress, she killed someone in anger. She was imprisoned and strangely escaped. Later she became the wife of a mountain stronghold. Later the stronghold was destroyed." Guan Wumei was incomparably shocked, and it was as if she had even forgotten about the pain of losing her hand. How did this young man know so much about her background? Could it be that he had specially set up this trap to capture her? She said in a hoarse voice, "Who the hell are you? How do I know so clearly?" Fan Xian shook his head and said, "I have a good memory, but this information is not very clear because you are not an important figure." Guan Wumei's life was strange. She could be considered a famous fierce bandit on the Yangtze River. Unexpectedly, she had been captured without the power to retaliate. Furthermore, the other party's words showed disdain toward her. This reality made her feel a glimmer of humiliation. Yet, the tone of the young man sitting in the chair and the temperament he exuded made her admit that he truly did not think much of her. "Since you know who I am, then you should have guessed that there is someone behind me. Unless you kill us all, you can forget about getting away with this." Guan Wumei, in her pain, began to foolishly threaten him, hoping that when he dealt with her and her people, he would show some mercy. The cruel reality shattered her fantasy. Fan Xian smiled and said, "What you say is exactly what I want to do." Guan Wumei was stunned. She suddenly felt an endless chill surge up her back and abruptly turned her head. The sound of countless knives slicing through throats rang out. It was very unpleasant to hear. It was like the kitchen in the back of Esher Tavern was slaughtering countless old hens at the same time. The dozen or so bandits who had followed Guan Wumei onto the boat had their throats slit by Fan Xian's personal guards. After confirming that they were dead, they were thrown into the river. Their actions were simple and professional. Not even a drop of blood landed on the deck. The sound of the river water rang out. A moment later, it became calm again. The corpses and blood were all absorbed into the forgiving current. He had killed a dozen people in a row without batting an eye. What a ruthless move. Guan Wumei's gaze finally became fearful. Looking at the other party's style of attack, she knew that he was used to doing this kind of thing. Turning her head, she saw that the young man had taken back the hand gesture from which he had given the order. Involuntarily she said in a trembling voice, "Don't kill me, Kik." Her teeth continuously chattered and made a strange sound. She swallowed hard and forced herself to calm down. Since the other party had not killed her at the same time, it meant that she still had a chance to live. "Please give my leader some face." Guan Wumei knelt on the ground in terror and begged Fan Xian for mercy. "Your leader?" Once Guan Wumei thought of the young master's power, a glimmer of hope immediately rose in her heart. "Looking at the way your subordinates do things, they have a martial style. Presumably you are also a kindred spirit. My leader is the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. He has hundreds of ships under his command and countless capable people. If you want to come to Jiangnan to do great things, you will certainly feel like old friends at first sight and have a pleasant conversation with my leader." Fan Xian did not pay attention to the inappropriate choice of words in this female bandit's words. He could hear that she was clearly begging for mercy, but in reality she was using the so-called leader of the Jiangnan water bandits to threaten him. He couldn't help smiling and shaking his head, thinking that this trip to Jiangnan was truly interesting. "Leader?" he said warmly. "You are talking about the 7th Ming master, right? The 7th young master of the Ming family, the 7th young master who has never truly entered the family. I heard that this young master's birth mother died many years ago. After the old Ming master passed away, the eldest young master who took over the family business, sent people everywhere to kill this illegitimate child who brought shame to the family. In reality, it was because the old Ming master had willed too many benefits to this 7th young master. The 7th young master of the Ming family had nowhere to hide, so he simply threw himself into the underworld. He hid his name and changed his name. He stopped being impatient and used patience to secretly kill people. After 5 or 6 years he finally made a name for himself. The great leader of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, the pitiful illegitimate child of the past, how did he end up like this?" Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. It seemed that this figure of some status in Jiangnan was far from what he had imagined. He actually had his subordinates go around stealing silver. His methods are too underhanded. Has he been short of silver recently? Jiangnan had always been rich and populous. Later the palace treasury was built there, creating countless rich people. Other than the salt merchants and sea merchants, the two most famous families were the Cui family and the Ming family. These two families had been related by marriage for generations and had climbed the eldest princess's path. No one knew how much money they had made by relying on the palace treasury. The Cui family was responsible for the palace treasury's smuggling routes to the north. According to the Overwatch Council's investigation, the Ming family should be responsible for the palace treasury's smuggling to Dongyi, as well as the overseas business. Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan to take over the palace treasury. Now that the Cui family had fallen, the first thing he had to do was shock the Ming family. Before he left the capital he had done his homework. He had talked through the night with Sir Yan Jr. and had long decided on a strategy. As he spoke slowly, Guan Wumei, who was kneeling on the ground, was truly scared to death. Ever since her young master had been chased out of the Ming family, he had been trying to take back his property all these years. However, his true identity was a secret. The leaders of the Jiangnan water bandits had no idea that their master was the descendant of a powerful family. The rich merchants of the Ming family were also kept in the dark. They even had some business dealings with the Jiangnan water bandits that could not see the light of day. Other than herself, who knew this secret because she had a relationship with the 7th Ming that outsiders did not know, Guan Wumei did not believe that anyone else knew the true identity of the current head of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei. Who would have thought that this young man would reveal it so readily? Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and smiled happily. "I understand now. The Cui family has fallen. Although the Ming family is heartbroken, they are even happier to be able to take over the Cui family's share. Presumably, the 7th Ming will not miss the opportunity to enter the business world and oppose the Ming family. In March, the palace treasury will have to put up new bidding documents. The Jiangnan water bandits want to wash clean, the 7th Ming wants revenge, and the seventh Ming wants to steal the palace treasury's marketing documents. All of this requires money. No wonder he is in such a hurry. Guan Wumei looked at Fan Xian with great fear. She wondered who this weak-looking young man was and how could he know so many things? The matter of the palace treasury was a secret of the court, yet she had guessed her young master's true thoughts in a moment. Looking at the warm smile hanging from the corners of Fan Xian's lips, her body was frozen and unable to move. The seventh Ming's table manners are not very good. A few hundred liang of silver is not too little. Fan Xian sighed. Before coming to Jiangnan, he had been curious about the seventh Ming that the Overwatch Council had secretly investigated. After all, his background seemed to be similar to his own. Now that he found that his methods were not very clever, he couldn't help feeling disappointed. He sighed to himself and lowered his head. Only then did he notice that Guan Wumei had already lowered her head and was speechless. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sometimes I like to talk to myself. Don't worry, I'll help you stop the bleeding in a moment." Guan Wumei asked, "Why didn't you kill me?" Fan Xian thought for a moment and then said, "I am not someone who likes to kill people. Besides, I still need to discuss business with your young master. If I killed his cousin, I was afraid he would be too hot-blooded and not rational enough to harm the business between us." Guan Wumei was already numb with shock. Since he could find out the young master's true identity, he could also find out her relationship with him. However, he said, "Business?" She hoped to be reborn and said with difficulty, "Sir, my leader is downstream." At this moment, she guessed that Fan Xian might also be the representative of some large power in Jingdo, which was why he had so many ace guards and knew so many secrets. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Tonight we are in the wrong. In the future we will definitely send an apology gift." Hearing the words at the beginning, she had thought that he would let her go. Unexpectedly, the young master sank into deep thought and didn't speak for a moment. She couldn't help but say in despair, "Sir, we are all walking the Jianghu. You have already killed a dozen of my subordinates. Is that not enough to quell your anger?" "Jianghu? Does this world really have Jianghu?" Fan Xian smiled slightly. "Furthermore, killing is not to quell anger. It is just a way of handling affairs. I will not let you leave this ship, at least not before I need you to leave. I don't want you to let your mouth slip and reveal your identity and bring unnecessary trouble to Jiangnan." Guan Wumei didn't understand his words, but she could at least hear the powerful confidence in them. In her despair, she said in a hoarse voice, "The matters of the Jianghu are the matters of the Jianghu. What exactly do you want to do?" The cabin was completely silent. After a moment, Fan Xian smiled lightly and said, "You misunderstand. I am not a Jianghu person." He propped up his chin and looked with interest at Guan Wumei's pale face. "I don't have the time to pay attention to a place like the Jianghu that fights and boisterous fights." Guan Wumei felt that he was becoming more and more mysterious and couldn't resist asking, You, who exactly are you?" "Meh." Fan Xian thought about it seriously. "I am a useless second-generation young master who is sitting around eating and waiting to die. Of course, I could also be the biggest second-generation young master in Qing Kingdom." Thinking of the guesses her group had made before they boarded the ship, Guan Wumei almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "You are a thief." Fan Xian stared into her eyes and said each word clearly. "And I am a thief. Since you have boarded my pirate ship, of course as the master, I have to take good care of you. Of course, your seventh young master will also board my pirate ship soon, and he can forget about leaving it for the rest of his life." Guan Wumei finally understood that he did not want to do business with the seventh young master. He wanted to subdue him for his own use. She cursed hatefully, wishful thinking. "You are only fit to wipe my young master's boots." Fan Xian was not angry. He chuckled and left the chair. He took out a golden needle and pricked it a few times between her elbows to help her stop the bleeding. He wanted to say something but suddenly felt there was no need. He thought to himself, "Your seventh young master will probably sincerely want to wipe my shoes in a few days. I just hope you won't be too surprised when the time comes." After everything was taken care of, the sailors who had been on the lower deck came up to the deck. They lifted large buckets from the river and washed away the spots of blood. Although only Guan Wumei had spilled blood on the ship, there was too much blood from her broken hand. Took some effort. After cleaning, the night wind rose again. Everyone yawned and went back to sleep. The ship recovered its calm as if nothing had happened earlier. "Go to sleep. There will be people on duty in the second half of the night," Fan Xian said as he glanced at Gouda. According to the rules of the Qing Kingdom, personal guards were always divided into 2 shifts. However, Fan Xian had forcefully changed it to 3 shifts. Although there were fewer people in each shift, he believed that the capitalists of that world must have their reasons for dividing workers into 3 shifts. Thinking about it, efficiency was guaranteed. Lifting up the thick curtains, he walked along the corridors between the 2 cabins until he reached the end. Fan Xian stopped and turned his head to glance at Shi Chanli's room. The scholar was indeed sleeping soundly. Su Wenmao had long woken up and was standing guard at the door with a face full of exhaustion. It was late at night, so the 2 of them did not say anything. Walking to the opposite side of his room, Fan Xian said something to the tiger guard standing guard at the door. He then gently pushed open the door and entered. He walked directly to the side of the bed and sat down. Looking at the little boy in the blankets, he was speechless for a long time. The 3rd prince's features were regular. At such a young age, he had a delicate and pretty appearance. However, Fan Xian knew that this kid was much stronger than his true age. The boat rocked gently. He pulled up the blankets on the bed to cover the other's shoulders. The wind on the river was cold. It would not be good if he froze. At this moment, the 3rd prince's tightly shut eyes moved slightly. Fan Xian laughed soundlessly. The child had probably woken up a long time ago and was just pretending to be asleep. He immediately thought of the fact that a child of 8 or 9 was even more awake than Shi Chanli. The burden on his heart was probably not enough. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh faintly in his heart. Living in a royal family, it was indeed easy for those filth and power schemes to raise freaks. Sometimes, the little boy was hateful, but he was not necessarily pitiful. He couldn't be bothered to expose the little tricks of a child. However, he occasionally lost focus and thought of the matter that Wanner had reminded him of. In his heart, he had a completely different idea. However, he could not make up his mind right now. The shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall were not on the southbound boat. Since Fan Xian had secretly come to Jiangnan to visit his family in the direction of Danzhou, he had done it very effectively. In the middle of the Wei River, the fake commissioner had already led the group of carriages east. Along the way there were black knights protecting them. They also led the shopkeepers. Presumably, everyone in court would think that he was in that group of carriages. No one would think that he had already arrived at the intersection of the Wei River and the Great River. Although they were going by water and could not have the Black Knights provide the fastest and most powerful support, Fan Xian was not worried about the problem of safety. There were 7 tiger guards on the boat and swordsmen from the 6th Bureau. With so many aces and assassins gathered on one boat, unless a great grandmaster personally came, no one in this world would be able to touch a finger of his. His warm palm gently patted the back of the 3rd prince, but his face was looking to the other side. It seemed that he was lost in thought. Currently, the most valuable person on the boat was actually this prince. With such a protective talisman at his side, even if he wanted to use his special authority to move the provincial army, it seemed that he would be able to find a good reason. The current scene was actually somewhat against the rules, but Fan Xian had always been a daring person and had no fear of the dignity of the royal family. Reluctantly bringing the 3rd prince along as a student was already giving the emperor and Yi Guipin enough face. After confirming that everything was normal, Guan Wumei, with a broken arm, was escorted into a simple cell on the lower level. Only then did Fan Xian completely relax. Rubbing his slightly swollen temples, he returned to his own bedroom. Raising his eyes, he saw Cece half leaning against the side of the bed sleepily. She had one hand supporting her chin. Her entire body swayed left and right with the gentle rocking of the boat. The girl was interesting. She just couldn't fall down like this. Fan Xian chuckled. He knew that she would wait for him to rest first before she was willing to sleep. He didn't dare make too much noise and tiptoed over. One hand went under Cece's armpit and the other wrapped around the crook of her leg. The girl was wearing a large half-worn robe and was very round. It was like he was holding a large hairy bear. Carefully moving Cece onto the bed, he didn't want to disturb her dream. Unexpectedly, she still opened her eyes and woke up. The haziness in her eyes disappeared in an instant. Forcing herself to sit up, she smiled and said, "I'll make blankets for the young master." Fan Xian quietly scolded with a smile, "You already slept earlier. Why are you making blankets? You're all sleepy and confused. Hurry up and go to sleep." Cece covered her mouth and smiled. "The blankets are cold again. When you were little, the young master didn't like to crawl into a cold blanket. Didn't you always let me warm it first?" Hearing these words, Fan Xian was slightly startled. Looking at the girl in front of him, he couldn't help but think of the days the 2 of them had spent in the old manor in Danzhou. In a flash, 2 years had passed. He had been busy fighting for power, getting married, and going on diplomatic missions. Intentionally or unintentionally, he and Cece had grown distant. Fortunately, Cece was still so considerate toward him. Involuntarily, a faint warmth welled up in his heart. He smiled and said, "Are you going to warm my bed today?" These words were a bit frivolous, but both Manners knew that Cece would one day open her face and enter a room as a senior servant. She had long prepared herself mentally. Suddenly hearing these words, her face blushed slightly. However, she didn't reply as refreshingly as she usually did. She only took off her outer robe and shrunk into the blankets. Shrunk into the young master's blankets, only leaving a head of black hair exposed outside the snow-white blankets. It was incomparably alluring. Fan Xian was slightly startled. A moment later he took off his clothes and crawled into the blankets. When the two of them were in Danzhou, they had grown up together. They had often laid in the same bed and fooled around in the same blankets. Other than that last moment, they had long done all the intimate things they were tired of doing. The lights in the cabin were not extinguished. Fan Xian embraced his senior servant from behind. His arms circled in front of her body and held her slightly cold hands. His chest pressed against her back. Listening to her breaths in front of him, he unconsciously held her tighter. "I'm 20, young master." Cece gently bit her lower lip as she spoke. Cece gently bit her lower lip as she spoke. Her words were filled with grievance and bitterness. Fan Xian didn't say anything. Smelling the faint fragrance coming from Cece's head and feeling the bouncy body in his arms, he very easily brought his mind back to the circumstances of his time in Danzhou. His entire person felt incomparably relaxed and at ease. Why do I feel like this chapter is a bit too pretentious? Fan Xian really is a hypocritical and pretentious pervert. I want to correct his unhealthy tendencies. On a pirate ship there is a thief in the heart. There is no need to break it. Only when everyone is good will it be good. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support genuine reading. Chapter 335. Unable to sleep in the middle of the night, the river wind outside the cabin sang. Fan Xian decided to open his eyes and said with a slight smile by her ear, "What's wrong with 20? Are you anxious?" Cece was truly anxious by these words. She sat up in the blankets and bit a lock of hair by her lip. She was so angry that she didn't say a word. Fan Xian paused and quickly pulled her body down. He knew he had said the wrong thing. Women in the Qin kingdom were usually married at 15 or 16. It was rare to see someone like Cece who was already 20 and still a virgin. Although Fan Xian always thought that 20 was the perfect age for maturity, in the eyes of most people, Cece had already become an old lady. Particularly in the Fan manor, although everyone was very polite to Cece for the sake of the Danzhou ancestor and Fan Xian, there was always less gossip in front of and behind people's backs. Fan Xian had never taken her into his room, which encouraged this kind of atmosphere. Thinking about it carefully, Fan Xian knew he hadn't handled this problem well. He always felt that there was no need to be anxious, but he didn't think from Cece's point of view. A girl was 20. If this was the other world, she would be a 30-year-old virgin. No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept this tragic reality. Cece curled up her body and ignored him as she sadly slept. Fan Xian thought for a bit and then smiled. "Speaking of which, it's been 2 years since we've laid in the same bed." When they were in Danzhou, although Cece, who was 2 years older than him, always slept on one side, Fan Xian had long developed the bad habit of going to her bed after waking up. The young master has grown up. Naturally, he can't always be with the servants. Cece buried her head in the blankets and replied in a humming voice. "This is going to take a long time." Fan Xian didn't coax her. He only said gently, "Only you don't dislike burnt papers like mine." Cece burst out laughing. If the young master had burnt papers, how could the girls in the world live? Master and servant suddenly fell silent at the same time. They both thought that these words were Wang Shifeng's self-deprecation in Story of the Stone. They slowly thought back to their time in Danzhou. Every night, one of them would copy books and the other would wait on her. In those days, whenever Fan Xian used the graceful small regular script to copy the Story of the Stone, Cece would stand to the side and grind the ink, take out the lamp, light the incense and prepare the supper. The two of them perfectly put into practice the saying, transcribing books at night with red sleeves and incense. Speaking of which, Cece was Fan Xian's first reader in this world. Fan Xian turned the girl's body around and tyrannically held her in his arms. "Since you've laughed, then don't cry. Listen to me tell you a joke that's worse than a beast." Cece curiously opened her eyes and waited for him to speak. After hearing the famous joke, she finally couldn't help burying herself in his arms and laughing. She mischievously said, "So young master is saying that he has been worse than a beast these years. Now that I think about it, I naturally have this problem." Fan Xian admitted his mistake very honestly. "Of course, the most important thing is that I don't know what you're thinking. Of course, I admit that these words are shamelessly hypocritical. What am I thinking?" Cici was confused. Fan Xian sighed in his heart and didn't say anything more. Cici suddenly understood what the young master meant. She was surprised and moved. Although the young master's way of thinking was indeed too absurd and muddle-headed, as if he was prepared to see what she thought, it still gave her some warmth. "Young master, do you remember when we were little? The time you hit housekeeper Zhou?" "Of course I remember." Fan Xian smiled. "That guy dared to give you a hard time. See if I don't beat his face until it's full of peach blossoms." Cici gathered her courage and looked at his face. She didn't speak for a long time. After all, she was a serving girl. How could she say such affectionate things? That day, Fan Xian had beaten housekeeper Zhou until his face was full of peach blossoms. The peach blossoms in Cici's heart had also bloomed at that time. At the time, Fan Xian was only 12 and Cici was not more than 14. Fan Xian didn't know what the serving girl was thinking. He thought back to the scene at the time and unconsciously said, "That slap was really hard." Cici curled up in his arms and giggled. "Young master's hands are strong." "My hands are strong?" Fan Xian chuckled. His left hand had already landed in the blankets, and it just so happened to hit Cici's round, perky bottom. The girl slept in a thin pair of underwear that was very thin. When his palm made contact with her bottom, it made a crisp smack. Memories were always beautiful and flirting was always pleasurable. Master and servant held each other like this for a long time without speaking. It was just that in the dead of night, there was a warm fragrance on the bedding, and the air began to warm up. Fan Xian finally began to act like a beast. His two hands had long since begun to search up and down the long road of cultivation. The light is still on," Cici said anxiously and shyly. At this time, Fan Xian had already entered the realm of an animal primate. He was impatient like a monkey. Hearing this, he stretched out his left arm and chopped behind him. He thought that this move he had learned from Yi Ling would easily break through the wind and blow out the candle on the table. Unexpectedly, as soon as his palm moved, the flame on the candle was still strong. Only then did he realize that his jinqi had completely dissipated. How could he still extinguish the candle through the air? He couldn't help but feel angry. For the first time, he realized that this was the biggest disadvantage of exploding jinqi. He muttered a few curses and reached under his pillow for his sleeve crossbow. Turning his head, he hastily pulled the trigger. With a swish, the crossbow arrow pierced through the candle and shot into the cabin. With a muffled sound, the candle immediately went out, and the cabin returned to darkness. He had made a big mistake. Before he had time to enjoy the sweetness of the darkness, he heard the sound of wind outside the cabin. It was unknown how many experts had gathered outside the cabin in a moment. He heard the sound of long sabers being unsheathed and the sound of crossbows being reloaded, intertwined. Earlier, Fan Xian had used the crossbow to extinguish the candle. Although the sound of the arrowhead entering the wood was soft, in the ears of these professionals, it was exceptionally shocking. Particularly since there was a prince and a commissioner on the ship, the people on guard were very alert. They only heard the vigilant voice of a tiger guard come from outside the cabin. "Sir, there's a situation." Fan Xian rose angrily. He was also glad that these loyal subordinates hadn't directly barged in. Turning around, he looked at the girls secretly laughing in the blankets. His heart ached and he was indescribably depressed. The night passed without words. Fan Xian rose early the next morning. He didn't have Cici help him brush his hair and dress. It was not convenient for a girl, so he could only lie in bed and continue to rest. He carried a bowl of porridge, some cornbread and pickled vegetables into the house. He served the poor girl breakfast and then finished what a man should do. He walked out of the cabin door and came to the bow of the ship. He gazed at the vast surface of the river and welcomed the cold winter wind. He felt refreshed from head to toe without a trace of discomfort. After the fog retreated in the early morning, the ship left Yingzhou. Most of the people on the ship were still sleeping. Fan Xian turned his head to look. The dock had long disappeared behind the mountains and could no longer be seen. "My lord, you woke up early." Su Wenmao spoke humbly to the side, but his gaze floated up and down Fan Xian's body. The joke from last night had long spread through the ship. No one dared to say anything to his face, but in their hearts they all found it amusing. Fan Xian did not notice his subordinates' unscrupulous gaze. Casually he said a few words. His gaze shifted and saw the third prince and Deng Ziyu walk out of the cabin door. "Greetings, Your Highness." Fan Xian politely bowed to the third prince in greeting. He was meticulous and did not slack at all because he was outside Jingdo. The third prince's face was childish and beautiful. He accepted the bow with some embarrassment and did not move his body. After Fan Xian finished his bow, he immediately straightened his body and stood steadily in front of the third prince without saying a word. The third prince scratched his head and held his small fists with great grievance. He bowed deeply toward Fan Xian and said, "Greetings, Sir Sai." The two beautiful people with complicated thoughts and a huge age gap began their daily life on the ship after a strange ceremony. On this ship, other than the group of subordinates that always followed Fan Xian, there were also a few palace-teaching nannies and 2 little eunuchs. They had all been transferred from the palace to specifically serve the princes. However, Fan Xian was ruthless and daring. He forcefully kept these people on the lower levels and did not allow them to come up. On Fan Xian's side, of the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council, other than the swordsman of the 6th Bureau responsible for assassination safety, he had also transferred 2 officials from the 2nd Bureau and the 4th Bureau to accompany him. The officials of the 2nd Bureau were responsible for maintaining the smooth flow of intelligence. The officials of the 4th Bureau were responsible for contacting the inspection officials of the Overwatch Council along the coast during the Jiangnan trip. Fan Xian's teacher had come from the 3rd Bureau. Now that he was in charge of the 1st Bureau, it meant that this ship already had most of the Overwatch Council structure. Although there were not many people, the division of labor and coordination went smoothly. Life on the ship was very boring. The people who had come out from Jingdo were interested in admiring the river scenery for the first few days, but they gradually grew tired of it. Additionally, the river wind was biting cold. These days, other than those with duties, everyone else stayed in their rooms to rest. Fan Xian and the third prince stood at the head of the ship and looked at the scenery of the valley coming toward them. No one knew what they were quietly talking about. The third prince nodded and Fan Xian's expression was warm. Su Wenmao stood at the back and looked at the commissioner and the prince. In his heart he was thinking about another matter. Why did the ship have to carry such a large chest of silver ingots? After giving his orders, he had the third prince stand at the head of the ship like Jack and walked back. Su Wenmao glanced at the boy at the head of the ship and said with a pained expression, "Sir, if His Highness gets sick from the cold, it won't be easy to explain. To train his will." Fan Xian was not gentle toward the third prince along the way and kept his distance. This was not only unexpected by everyone on the ship, but presumably even the third prince himself felt it was particularly strange. "Sir, that chest of silver?" Su Wenmao probingly asked. Fan Xian shook his head. "Just watch it. Since that woman has already seen it, don't let anyone else come into contact with it." Su Wenmao made a sound of acknowledgement and did not continue asking questions. Fan Xian stretched lazily and suddenly thought of sitting on a large ship, carrying a chest of silver, and bringing a beauty down to Jiangnan. He really did have some of the style of a second generation. It was a pity that the weather was not very good. Otherwise he would have sunbathed and drank some frozen fruit juice. That would have been even more beautiful. "Guan Wumei is locked up by us." Su Wenmao furrowed his brows. "How can we let Master Xia of the Jiangnan water bandits know? When the ship reaches Yangzhou in the afternoon, do we need to notify the local council officials and let the news out?" Fan Xian thought for a bit and then shook his head. "There's no need. For now, I don't want him to guess who I am. Once these vicious people on the Jianghu discover that they can't figure out the other party's background, they will become more cautious. What I want to see is just how much he is willing to pay for this matter. Then, don't let the people of the 4th Bureau spread the news." Fan Xian smiled and said. "Last night wasn't there still a third sister-in-law you left in Yingzhou? Naturally she will think of a way to notify Xia Qifei." On this day the person who felt the most fear in the entire Qing kingdom was the third sister-in-law Fan Xian spoke of. The civilian ship on the Yingzhou dock had already left. The third sister-in-law stood like an idiot by the side of the dock, holding a bag of cured meat that had not been completely smoked. She didn't even bother to greet the occasional person who came to ask about the price. She was the mountain bandit spy in Yingzhou. She was usually responsible for gathering information. Yesterday she was the first to find out about the silver chest on the ship. The disappearance of the ship was not a big deal. According to the style of Sister Guan's group of mountain bandits, after killing people and stealing goods, they would drive the ship away in the middle of the night, wash downstream and then burn the ship to destroy all evidence. Thus, when she saw the ship disappear this morning, she thought Sister Guan and the others had already succeeded. Unexpectedly, she waited on the dock for a long time, but there was no reply. Sister Guan did not come back. Second brother did not come back. Everyone did not come back. Just like the ship, all of the mountain bandits disappeared without a trace and never appeared again. She waited until dusk, but the side of the dock was still deathly silent. At this time, the third sister-in-law finally confirmed that something had happened. Her lips trembled. She didn't dare to believe this reality. Even if the guards on the ship were powerful, they should have heard the sounds of fighting last night. The government should have reacted. How could there be no news at all? Was that ship a ghost ship that easily took over a dozen lives? That very night, she changed her clothes, wrapped her hair, and hid the rest of the money at home. She spent a lot of money to hire a carriage and traveled downstream along the difficult mountain road. She did not stop after passing Yangzhou and continued eastward until she reached the big county where she was about to enter Jiangnan Road. This took her a whole 2 days. On the way, she only drank some water and didn't eat any food. She was a low-ranking person. It was originally difficult for her to see Sister Guan's master. However, perhaps it was her deep eye sockets that made the advisor in charge of receiving her believe her words. With a heavy expression, he led her into the back garden. In the most heavily guarded back garden in Yingzhou, the Jiangnan water bandits' leader, Xia Qifei, who was not more than 30 years old and was famous in the Jianghu, had his eyes closed. Listening to the third sister-in-law's reply, he slowly opened his eyes. They were cold and threatening. As long as the ship is still on the water, stop it. Naturally, the ship would always be on the water. Xia Qifei commanded the heroes of the Jiangnan waterways under his command. There were countless ships. His words revealed a strong self-confidence and faint anger. Chapter 336. Winter had come and the water was dry. Both sides of the river were filled with workers repairing the embankments. They were laboriously carrying stones and sand like ants. It was said that the silver on top had not been completely pulled out, so other than the contractors, the rest of the workers were somewhat dispirited. After a busy day with no money in their pockets, no one would put much effort into it. Only then did the idling workers have the extra time to look at the river that they had long grown tired of looking at, and learn from the high and mighty scholarly officials. At first glance, everyone was quite shocked. They saw that on the river that flowed into Jiangnan Road, there were suddenly many more boats, patrolling up and down. Shipping in winter was not as good as in the other 3 seasons, and it was rare for it to be so lively. It was as if someone had cast some magic overnight, and many boats had landed on the river. The boats were of various sizes, shapes, and speeds. There were even a few tri-winged boats that had been slightly modified. The tri-winged boats were used by the Jiangnan Navy. They were extremely fast and had never been allowed to be used by the common people. What was similar was that the men standing on the boats all had bulging waists, presumably hiding weapons. Other than the obvious rust on their dark cheeks, there was a silent murderous intent and vigilance. To be able to gather so many boats on this waterway that flowed into Jiangnan Road in 2 days without alerting the government, the only one who could do this was the famous Jiangnan water bandits. In terms of the ability to control the river, even the famous families in Jiangnan were far inferior to the Jiangnan water bandits. The full name of the Jiangnan water bandits was Jiangnan and Related Waters 12 Linked Docks. This was a cute name. They specialized in making a living on Jiangnan's waterways that were as dense as a spider's web. Whether it was transporting goods, passengers, or related industries, they all had to look at their faces. In particular, the secret salt, tea, and horse trading business allowed them to grasp great power. After Lady Ming, the person who changed his name to Xia Qifei became the head of the water bandits. He put even more effort into forming a good relationship with the government. It was even rumored that this Master Xia could be brothers with the admiral of the Sha Lake Navy. When hoodlums joined the government, no one could stop them. Thus, these years, although the Jiangnan water bandits had ostensibly reduced their business on the underworld, they gradually began to walk out of the lake water plants and openly came to the common people. Their reputation was even greater than before. Only such a powerful force could move unhindered on the great river and sail boats along the river without fear of criticism. The person who gave the order was the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei. Although he did not care much about the life and death of his subordinates, the suddenly missing Guan Wumei had some relationship with his mother. What made him even more wary was who could take such a big bite out of him without anyone knowing and suffer such a huge loss. In March, the palace treasury would reopen. Usually it would not be 2 small dishes for the Cui and Ming families. However, this year, because the Chui family had fallen and everyone under heaven knew that the jurisdiction of the palace treasury had moved from the eldest princess to Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council, Xia Qifei decided to try and see if, in the new situation, he could take advantage of an opening and openly take back what had originally belonged to him. However, the business of the palace treasury was too big. The amount of silver was in the hundreds of thousands. In March, even if he wanted to enter the door of the god of wealth to sit and drink tea, the amount of silver he would have to take out would be frightening. The fallen Chui family and the still thriving Ming family all had this kind of power, but Xia Qifei definitely did not. Even if he controlled the largest gang on the waterways, the silver in his hands, compared to the Ming family, was like a beggar's. Thus, he was in a rush to gather silver everywhere and even secretly ordered Guan Wumei to start the river pirate business again. He was not even willing to let go of such a small amount of silver. It was clear that he had been forced to the point of going crazy. It was said that a single copper coin could not stump a hero. The heroes who lived on the river wanted to learn how to do business. The first problem they encountered was money. At this critical moment, Xia Qifei became increasingly careful. He did not lose his rationality. He was guessing whether or not the incident on the shore of Yingzhou was targeted at him. When it happened, he was in Shazhou inviting the Jiangnan Navy garrison commander, Sir Su Shoshan, to drink. The rumors on the Jianghu were always exaggerated. The highest-ranking naval officer he could come into contact with was a garrison commander. After this, Sir Su learned of this matter. He maintained his silence and allowed Xia Qifei to search the boat. However, he still gave the people of the water bandits a warning. Everything had to be done before the beginning of March. After it was done, they had to wash themselves clean and wash away the smell of blood on their bodies. The commissioner was coming to Jiangnan from Danzhou in March. The dozens of Jiangnan water bandits' boats searched for a long time on the river but still did not find the obviously large boat. They couldn't help but be surprised. Xia Qifei listened to his subordinate's report and coldly narrowed his eyes. Looks like those people did not come down. That chest is not so easy to move off the boat. It should still be near Yangzhou. Have you checked? The man with the white cloth wrapped around his head to block the river wind paused and said with embarrassment, "We calculated the time. In 2 days the boat should have reached near Shazhou. Who would have thought that the other party would cling on and not leave?" Xia Qifei was incomparably angry and almost kicked him. He scolded, "Are you a pig?" Pausing slightly, he shouted darkly, "Search upwards. If alive, I want to see the person. If dead, I want to see the corpse. At the very least, drag that boat back for me." The man accepted the order and left. He didn't notice that the chief's words showed that he was beginning to lose confidence. Xia Qifei sat by the table and could not calm his anger for a long time. This half-year was the most important half-year of his life. He would not allow anyone or anything to disturb him. Otherwise, he would have to start planning the revenge he had planned for so long again. Downing the cold tea in his bowl in one gulp, it actually made him feel a little hot. 2 ruthless expressions appeared in his eyes. He simply walked to the middle courtyard and waited for the good news from his brothers. He undid the buttons on his chest, revealing the many scars on his fierce flesh. These scars were a bit strange. They were neatly lined up side by side. They did not look like the scars of knives and axes from fighting on the Jianghu. Rather, they looked like they had been tied up and viciously whipped. At noon, a large boat slowly left the bustling docks of Yangzhou and moved down. At the same time, dozens of Jiangnan water bandits' boats aggressively moved upstream, braving the dangers of traveling at night and searching for traces of the enemy. The heavens did not purposely arrange for a time of hide and seek. Before the sun had sunk behind the mountains, the 2 sides finally met at Jingbo Bend, the slowest part of the river. Dozens of boats swiftly moved up. The water bandits' natural ability to control boats was now put to full use. With a few changes in formation, they surrounded the large boat in the middle of the river. The Jiangnan water bandits' boats carefully surrounded the boat from Jingdo. The 3-winged flying boat in the lead moved closer to the large boat. The large boat had already stopped, as if it had given up resistance. The head of the water bandits on the 3-winged flying boat yelled toward the large boat, "People on the boat, listen up. You have been surrounded. Immediately put down the weapons in your hands and accept inspection." Please forgive my laziness. There was still silence on the large boat. The head of the water bandits' expression was slightly stern. He made a hand signal. At the same time, 6 boats moved closer. They stretched out their long bamboo poles and with some difficulty hooked onto the bulkhead of the large boat. They took out their short knives and prepared to force their way onto the boat. It was at this moment that the large boat suddenly moved. It moved with full speed. With a speed that left the water bandits dumbfounded, it charged toward the outside of the encirclement. In an instant, the large boat's enormous driving force completely tore apart the long bamboo hooks that had just been hooked to the side of the boat. A dozen or so water bandits who had been climbing up fell miserably into the water, kicking up countless waves. The surface of the river was a mess. The large water bandit boat blocking the way collided with the boat from Jingdo without any fancy moves. Then, without any fancy moves, it turned its head, bent its waist, and gracefully slid away. Of course, this beautiful movement was accompanied by the unpleasant accompaniment of the deck cracking and the startled cries of sailors. Leaving behind a white wave, the boat from Jingdo sped downstream. Only the mirror-like surface of the river was left with countless wood shavings and water bandits bobbing up and down. The head of the water bandits grabbed the edge of the boat and steadied himself in the large waves. He stared dumbfoundedly at the back of the large boat. His heart was abnormally shocked. This boat was too sturdy. Furthermore, from a complete standstill to such a fast speed, how did the sailor manage to do it? Why did it seem to be of a higher level than him? The sailors on the boat from Jingdo were all the officers of the Chuanzhou Navy who had been taken away. What they studied all year round was the art of water battles. Naturally, their ability to control large boats in water battles was much better than these Jiangnan water bandits who played like ants eating elephants. However, because the boats were afraid of underwater reefs, they did not dare to move recklessly on the surface of the river. Thus, the boat from Jingdo did not have full sails. Compared to the three-winged flying boats used by the Navy, it did not have much of an advantage in speed. The boat from Jingdo charged through a line of defense and was immediately followed by a dozen or so flying boats. At this moment, half of the river was red. The boat from Jingdo was in front, and the boats of the Jiangnan water bandits were behind. They rushed downstream at high speed, leaving behind countless faint scars on the surface of the water. They scratched at the yellow river water, creating a beautiful scene of hundreds of boats racing against the current. Use the hooks. The head of the Jiangnan water bandits yelled loudly and made a few hand gestures at the same time. Although the wind on the river was strong and blew his words to the horizon in the blink of an eye, seeing his hand gestures, the water bandits surrounding the large boat took out a pile of ropes and threw them toward the large boat. A dozen ropes flew through the air, drawing beautiful arcs and landing accurately on the deck of the large boat. The water bandits were very skilled. Indeed, they were used to this kind of skilled work. Everyone then tightened their grip, and the hooks at the ends of the ropes firmly latched onto the deck of the boat. At this moment, the speed of the two sides was similar, and the ropes were not as hard as bamboo. The water bandits were no longer worried. Their hands and feet nimbly began to climb up the ropes onto the large boat. When they had climbed halfway, a pitiful halfway, a dozen or so partition windows opened up on the side of the large boat. From each window, a long spear or axe stretched out and viciously chopped down at the people on the ropes. There was only the sound of wind from the knives and wretched cries. Blood sprayed in all directions with the river wind, and broken limbs floated down with the turbid waves. In a moment, the water bandits had suffered heavy casualties. Some people had luckily fallen into the river, but the ropes and hooks had been chopped off. Then, from the windows of the boats from Jingdo, a dozen arrows, knocked and ready to be fired, coldly aimed at the surrounding boats. Although they had not been fired, they were full of intimidation. It was as if they were saying, if anyone dared to come closer, they would kill without question. The head of the water bandits in the back watched with wide eyes. He revealed his abnormality, but he also felt a chill in his heart. He had spent many years on the river and experienced countless times suppressing bandits. Of course, he knew that the longbow, spear, and axe were the standard weapons of the court's navy. Is there some conspiracy? The boat lowered its sails and moved very quickly. It immediately left Jinghua Bay and arrived in the waters of Shazhou. The head of the water bandits stared fiercely at the large boat that was still surrounded. He knew that although the other party was unexpectedly well prepared and powerful, even an elephant was afraid of an ant. As long as they were still walking on the surface of the river, he who had grown up by the river would always have a way to make them sink to the bottom of the river. All he needed was time. As if responding to his request, 4 large boats suddenly appeared on the surface of the river in front of them. They lined up horizontally on the surface of the river and just happened to block the way down. These 4 large boats had 3 stories in total and were extremely tall. The shadows they cast in the river were lengthened and looked very powerful. The head of the water bandits narrowed his eyes and saw that it was the ship of the Navy that had often secretly cooperated with them in recent years. He couldn't help but be overjoyed and yelled, "We have brothers to help. Everyone, don't worry." The boats from Jingdo continued to silently and determinedly charge downstream. It was as if the 4 ships of the Sha Lake Navy did not exist. It was as if they were going to commit suicide tragically. Seeing the scene under the setting sun, the head of the Jiangnan water bandits was immediately dumbfounded and fell to the ground on his butt. Seeing that the boats from Jingdo were about to be pincered to death and fall into a tight encirclement, the 4 ships of the Sha Lake Navy downstream tilted their rudders at the same time as if they had discussed it. They opened up a path for the boats from Jingdo, allowing them to leisurely and unhurriedly follow the water. What was going on? The head of the water bandits didn't dare believe his eyes. The remnants of reason in his mind told him that the boat he and his group had been chasing for a long time was very similar to the 4 large ships of the Navy. He didn't have much time to think. The 4 Navy ships were like 4 giant beasts lying in front of the Jiangnan water bandits' boats. The feeling of oppression was very oppressive. The head of the Jiangnan water bandits also recognized the official standing at the bow of the Navy. It was Master Xia's close friend, the commander of the Sha Lake Navy garrison, Sir Su Shoshan. Su Shoshan stood coldly at the bow of the ship. However, the clothes on his body seemed to have been put on in a hurry. The straps weren't even fastened properly. It looked a bit comical. He looked at the old acquaintance below and furrowed his brows slightly. He used his eyes to indicate to the other party that it was best for him to quickly surrender. He didn't care if the other party understood or not. Using an authoritative voice, he said, "People on the boat, listen up. You have been surrounded. Immediately put down the weapons in your hands and accept inspection. Please forgive my laziness once again." The city of Shazhou was right where Sha Lake entered the river. The waters clashed with each other. After tens of thousands of years, it had accumulated countless fertile soil. Adding to the hard work of the common people, it had always been one of the famous food-producing areas along the river. Following the withdrawal of the Chuanzhou Navy a dozen years ago, after the Sha Lake Navy accepted a portion of the manpower, it became the largest naval base in the Qing Kingdom. Tens of thousands of Navy soldiers' daily lives depended on this city that held the throat of Jiangnan. The Navy soldiers, who reeked of sweat and water, brought endless worry to the people of Shazhou, endless danger to the women of Shazhou, and countless problems of public safety to the officials of Shazhou. At the same time, they brought endless amounts of money and business opportunities to Shazhou. Most of the salaries that the court gave those single men every year were used on the brothels, gambling houses and restaurants in Shazhou. Thus, Shazhou's entertainment industry, or more accurately, the third industry, was very developed. All kinds of restaurants stood in great numbers. The west side was filled with red sleeves. The east side was filled with dice from dawn to dusk. It was very lively. On this day, a few people walked out of Shazhou's most famous inn. This group of people was a bit strange. There was a young master, a girl, a scholar, and a child. Behind them followed a few solemn-looking guards. The group of people directly hired a large carriage and drove directly to the south of the city. This group of people was Fan Xian, Cixi, the third prince, Shi Chanli, and those seemingly normal tiger guards. They stopped in Yangzhou for a night and discussed their following itinerary. The local people of the 4th Bureau went to mobilize the Sha Lake Navy. As for what procedures were used, it was unknown. Presumably, the military had to protect the Overwatch Council no matter what. Looking at Fan Xian's appearance, it seemed that he was not going to hide his identity anymore. This confused Su Wenmao, who was still on the boat. He let the large boat deal with the water bandits on the river while Fan Xian took the people beside him and got off the boat early in the night in Yangzhou. Sitting in the carriage, they comfortably followed the official road to Shazhou. He did it so secretly that no one noticed. The atmosphere in the south of Shazhou was a bit tense. In this place, all sorts of people mixed together. Everyone knew that the tyrant of the Jiangnan water bandits, Master Xia, was doing something. They didn't know the specific details, but from the endless flow of water bandits coming in and out of the little courtyard, they knew that this matter was troublesome. The little courtyard looked unremarkable, but everyone knew that it was the Shazhou branch of the Jiangnan water bandits' 72 docks. Thus, when the carriage Fan Xian was in came within a few dozen feet of the little courtyard, people had long noticed, particularly the spies the water bandits had scattered on the street. They stared closely as if trying to determine the purpose of this group of people. No one noticed that in the dusky twilight, the seemingly normal 6th Bureau assassins had already taken over a few of the most advantageous spots on the street. As the carriage came closer and closer to the branch, some people gradually came closer, intentionally or unintentionally glancing at the carriage. The atmosphere was a bit tense. The people in the carriage didn't seem to notice anything. They drove straight to the door of the courtyard before stopping. A scholar lifted the curtain and came down. Walking up the stone steps, he raised his hands to the thugs at the door and said a few words with a calm expression. In a moment, a person with upside-down eyebrows and soybean-like eyes walked out of the branch. He looked at him with a cautious expression and narrowed his eyes. "Who are you people? Why do you want to see Master Xia?" The scholar was Shi Chanli. He had never been in the so-called Jianghu. Looking at the advisor's sinister expression and the thugs coming up from all around, it was clear that they all had weapons on them. The scholar's heart was truly flustered. He couldn't help but silently curse his teacher for making him do this kind of thing was too inhumane. He still forcefully suppressed his nervousness and said, "We have come from Jingdo to see Master Xia. We have important matters to discuss." The advisor of the branch looked at him with disdain. He was rather dissatisfied with the other party's attitude. Slanting his eyes, he looked at the carriage and said, "Is it you or is it the person in the carriage? If it is the person in the carriage, why don't you get out when you are in front of the door? Being so sneaky, how can you be a guest?" The three people in the carriage did not hear what was said outside. Fan Xian had thrown Shi Chanli out with the intention of training the scholar's state of mind. At this moment he was focused on talking to the third prince. Warmly he said, "Your Highness, from Yangzhou to Shazhou, the people's lives we have seen along the way are very different from Jingdo. Please remember this." They traveled through the night. Along the way, Fan Xian purposely had the third prince come into contact with the common people along the way. He wanted him to see the most realistic life of the common people. Regardless of whether it was the old man carrying salaries by the side of the road or the second mother selling herbal tea in the shop, they would all specially stop to say a few words. Fan Xian had no experience with the so-called education of a prince, and he didn't have any methods. He could only feel the stones to cross the river and try to see if this method would work. As for Fan Xian's arrangements, Shi Chanli seemed to have smelled something and couldn't help but worry for his teacher. The third prince accepted it calmly. With a maturity far beyond his age, he maintained his silence and did not speak carelessly. "The people's lives are difficult," the third prince replied respectfully. "Although the taxes of the Qing kingdom are not heavy, the lives of the common people are still not easy. However, looking at the peaceful expressions on the faces of the common people along the way, it is clear that the common people's demands are not high. The crux of government is to first satisfy the common people's most basic needs for food and clothing." Fan Xian was purely a blind person giving directions. How would he know how to govern the world? He nodded his head non-committally and said, "The common people are easy to appease, but all the needs of the palace and the salaries of court officials come from the common people. In the future, when you help the crown prince govern the world, you have to pay attention to the limits of what you take. As long as it doesn't exceed the limits, it will be fine." The third prince glanced at Fan Xian and suddenly smiled innocently. "Teacher, the customs of the people of Yangzhou are far more valiant than those of Shazhou. The people there all have resentment on their faces. Presumably the court has taken too much." On the boat, this young third prince had very intimately requested to call Fan Xian teacher instead of Sir Sai. He purposely wanted to get closer to Fan Xian. Fan Xian had tried to stop him a few times, but to no avail, so he let him be. Hearing these words, he unconsciously thought of the Yangzhou Zhizhou that had been killed by him and didn't want to continue this topic. Changing the subject, he asked, "Regarding the Jiangnan water bandits, what does your highness think? Teacher has said that chivalrous people use martial arts to break the law. Furthermore, the so-called water bandits are just a group of gangsters on the water and hoodlums on the boat. They murder for money and use violence to obtain wealth. They do not have the chivalrous spirit you speak of." A glimmer of ruthlessness flashed across the third prince's youthful face. "In my opinion, we should move the army and capture them all in one fell swoop. The leaders should all be beheaded, and the accomplices should be exiled to the northern frontier." Fan Xian paused and said, "As I said earlier, the customs of the people are created by the terrain and living environment. Blindly exterminating them is like a wildfire burning out. Perhaps the weeds can be cleared out for a while, but if the people's livelihood is not taken into consideration, the people will not be able to survive and will still fall into the path of bandits. It is like after the spring breeze, the weeds grow again. When will such a cycle end?" The third prince thought for a bit and then shook his head. "Teacher, what you say is wrong. The court must use heavy punishment against these troublemakers. You also said that the Jiangnan water bandits must have connections with the Sha Lake Navy to be able to survive until now. If these troublemakers are allowed to secretly destroy the laws of the court, how will they be cleaned up in the future?" He continued coldly and ruthlessly, Pacifying the people's livelihood and letting them live well is naturally a must to rid the world of bandits. However, for those bandits who dare to show their heads, we cannot be lenient. Those who should be killed must be killed. Fan Xian looked at the third prince with a not quite there smile. He found that this child was indeed much more direct and efficient than he was. However, his ability to hide it was far worse than his own. For him to dare to raise an opposing opinion in front of him, presumably he wanted to show his openness and sincerity. By proposing to use the word exterminate to deal with the Jiangnan water bandits, he wanted to show his decisive and undisguised side in front of him and let him feel his sincerity. Fan Xian wanted to purposely influence and change the third prince on the Jiangnan trip, and the third prince also wanted to influence him. Although the little guy did not do it smoothly enough, to have such scheming at such a young age was truly impressive. Then why did your highness not oppose me coming to the Jiangnan water bandits today? Teacher has his own clever plans. It is not something I can make wild guesses about. The third prince recovered his calm and giggled. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that although the third prince did not know the details, he should be able to guess his general direction. He smiled self-mockingly and thought to himself that he was indeed a somewhat hypocritical person. At this time, the conversation outside the carriage was also halfway through. No one knew what Shi Chanli said, but the advisor's expression finally became flustered. The thugs surrounding the carriage also moved closer. The curtain of the carriage lifted and Fan Xian walked down first. He looked around at the scenery in the dusk as if he did not care much about the approaching water bandits. He then turned around and pulled the third prince and Cece down. The third prince stood by his side and pulled him up to his armpits. He looked at the thugs around with great interest and quietly asked, "Teacher, are these the so-called Jianghu people?" Fan Xian replied, "I think they are." The third prince was a bit excited, but he was not afraid. After all, he was a prince. How could he know the dangers of the Jianghu? Following at Commissioner Fan's side, he never considered the problem of his own safety. Ever since the Hanging Temple incident, the third prince had decided that with Commissioner Fan present, no one would be able to harm him. Furthermore, now that everyone under heaven knew of Fan Xian's past, the son of heaven was by nature heartless, but the third prince thought Fan Xian was an exception. Fan Xian glanced at him from the side and asked curiously in a quiet voice, "Young master, why aren't you worried at all?" The third prince giggled and said, "With teacher here, what is there to be afraid of?" In everyone's hearts, Fan Xian was still a martial genius who could be mentioned in the same breath as Haitang of Northern Qi, but no one knew his true situation. They just didn't understand why Fan Xian dared to go so deep into the tiger's den without any regard for his own safety. The conversation between the two fell into the ears of the Jiangnan water bandits. It seemed to explain each other's identities. That child was probably the son of some large clan, and Fan Xian, this beautiful scholar, was a teacher. However, he seemed a bit too young. "Young master, let's go in." Ignoring the vigilant and nervous gazes of the people around him, Fan Xian was calm and unruffled. With one hand holding the child and the other holding the woman, he walked toward the gate of the courtyard. Shi Chanli lowered his head and followed, sweating profusely. This examination could be considered a failure. His teacher had told him not to reveal his identity, but he had to enter openly. The scholar had no other choice. The advisor's expression changed continuously. Looking at the composition of the other party, he guessed that the other party was the enemy that the master of the stronghold had been painstakingly searching for. But why did the other party dare to come to their door? When did the other party get off that ship? At this moment, the countless brothers of the Jiangnan water bandits were painstakingly searching for traces of Fan Xian and the others on the surface of the river. They were engaged in a desperate struggle with that large ship. Who would have thought that the enemy they were searching for would so boldly come to Shazhou, so arrogantly come to the door of the branch and directly charge in? Take them down. The advisor's face alternated between green and white. It seemed that he had never seen such an arrogant enemy before. In the depths of his heart he was also a bit flustered. But Master Xia was currently in the courtyard. If he reacted slowly, he was afraid that there would be a big problem. Following this shout, the thugs pulled out their short knives, let out a roar and charged toward Fan Xian and the others. Fan Xian felt his right hand tighten slightly. He turned his head and saw that the third prince still maintained an innocent smile on his face, but his hand had unconsciously clenched. Presumably, other than pretending, he was still a bit scared. Confidence. At this juncture, Fan Xian still did not forget to explain. The people of the royal family must have confidence that can overwhelm everything. Dang 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 dang. Just like that absurd song, The brothers of the Shazhou branch of the Jiangnan water bandits also saw a very absurd scene. They saw countless short knives fly up from the door of the little courtyard like it was raining, mysteriously breaking away from the control of their hands. Immediately after, there were countless muffled grunts. All the thugs who blocked Fan Xian's path were sent flying. Gao De led the 6 tiger guards like a gust of wind and floated to the side of Fan Xian and the others. Silently they pulled out the long knives on their backs and sent the thugs flying. Their aura shot up into the sky. It could truly be said that those who blocked them would be forced to retreat. Fan Xian's face remained calm as he held the 2 of them and walked toward the little courtyard. Accompanied by the wretched cries and knife flashes, his footsteps were very steady. Although there are millions of people, I will go forward, he explained to the 3rd prince beside him. The court does not need to deal with the Jianghu people. We only need to arrange for them to do things, so when we first meet, don't talk about anything. The 3rd prince nodded. His eyes darted around the fighting beside him. He thought that this kind of feeling was very satisfying. He was very excited. His little palms began to sweat and become slightly wet. Why is it that the martial arts of these Jianghu people are so weak? The 3rd prince was a bit confused about the reality in front of him. At this time, some of the people of the Jiangnan water bandits were already lying on the ground and could not get up for a long time. Those who could still stand looked at Fan Xian and his group with fear in their eyes, particularly when they looked at the silent long knife hands. They were incomparably shocked. The advisor, covered in cold sweat, stared fixedly at the steady hands holding the hilts of the knives. He howled in his heart, when did the Jianghu suddenly have so many 7th and 8th level aces? And they were even guards for someone. At this time, everyone had already walked to the bottom of the stone steps in the main hall. Fan Xian stopped and smiled at the 3rd prince. What is the purpose of practicing martial arts? Just like studying, it is for power, profit and fame. What the Jianghu can give to martial artists, the court can give even more. Thus, the truly famous scholars are all officials in the court, and the truly powerful aces are all working for the court. Young master, don't be fooled by those stories. The Jianghu is a poor place. How can a job with no future like collecting protection money attract true aces? In front of the main hall, the head of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, finally stood out. He looked coldly at the gradually approaching group of people and opened his mouth to say, "Everyone leave, don't make a fool of yourself. I will meet these honored guests from Jingdo." At this time his expression was calm, but in the depths of his heart, he was incomparably shocked. He had long guessed that the other party was from the ship from Jingdo. How could he have guessed that they would not avoid him and instead come so tyrannically to his door? Without waiting for him to extend his hand in invitation, Fan Xian and his group entered the main hall as if they were returning home. Fan Xian invited the 3rd prince to sit in the main seat, and then he sat down next to him. Cici and Shi Chanli stood quietly behind him. The 7 tiger guards had their hands on the hilts of their knives and were spread out around the main hall. Seeing the other party's actions, Xia Qifei was so angry that his anger almost rushed to his heart. Was this still his territory? He forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart and raised his hands toward Fan Xian. "Qifei greets you, sir. However, there are heroes in the wilderness of the Jianghu. Your words earlier were a bit excessive." At this time, if he still couldn't see that Fan Xian was a powerful figure from Jingdo, then he really was an idiot. Thus he had to suppress his anger. Within the borders of the Qing kingdom, the court was a terrifying existence that could not be broken through like an iron plate. Any power that tried in vain to oppose the officialdom would, in the end, meet a tragic fate of being turned to dust and smoke. Xia Qifei. Fan Xian looked at the sinister-looking figure in front of him and confirmed his identity. He smiled warmly and said, "For now, I do not wish for anyone to know that I have come to your manor as a guest. Earlier many people saw. Go and handle it. It is a bit difficult. Consider it my first test of Master Xia." Chapter 337. After the young official in front of him opened his mouth, Xia Qifei's head exploded. The feeling of humiliation he had suppressed for a long time made his hands begin to tremble. After all, he was the master of the Jiangnan water bandits, a famous figure in the underworld. When had he ever been bullied like this? However, he was a clever person. Although he was not sure of his own judgment, he already had a rough guess as to the other party's identity. If his guess was correct, then this young official was not simple. The child beside him was even more. Endure. I have to endure. Xia Qifei continuously told himself this in his heart. He knew that given the other party's power, He only needed to stretch out his little finger and he could completely wipe away all of the family property he had accumulated over the years. There was no need to mention his revenge, and the thousands of brothers under him who still had to support their families would probably all have their heads rolled. More importantly, the boundless reverence the Qin people had for the royal family bound his heart and made it impossible for him to have any thoughts of disobedience. So he could only endure. Although the men of Jianghu were always a bit hot-blooded and hoodlums were also a bit ruthless, for the sake of the lives of his brothers and the wishes of his life, Xia Qifei suppressed the anger in his chest and said respectfully with a glimmer of humility, "I wonder what orders you have for me today?" Fan Xian glanced at him and said, "I'll have to trouble you to first take care of the matter I ordered earlier." Although he used the title of Master Xia, his words were still light and without any force. There was not a trace of the respect commonly seen on the Jianghu. Xia Qifei didn't know what the other party was planning. With a heavy expression, he turned and left the hall to give a few orders to the trembling advisor. Fan Xian sat in the hall drinking tea. He did not seem to be in a hurry. The conversation began again. "I have come today to ask you a matter," Fan Xian said warmly as he put down his teacup. Fan Xian put down his teacup and gazed at Xia Qifei warmly. "A few nights ago on the Yingzhou dock, some guests came onto my boat. I asked them to stay. How is Master Xia prepared to explain this matter?" Xia Qifei's expression darkened. He did not answer this question. Instead he took the initiative to ask, "Sir, I will speak frankly. It is fine for me to deny this matter. It's just that the people of Jianghu can't do something like leaving their brothers behind. That's right, the people who accidentally boarded Your Excellency's treasured boat that night were all my brothers. Your Excellency came to the south incognito, and I was blind to have offended Your Excellency. Please forgive me, Your Excellency. I'll bear all the blame and I hope Your Excellency can spare my subordinates." The third prince was tired of listening to him. He slammed the teacup on the table and with a bang the child coldly snorted, Can you afford it?" He purposely lengthened the sentence but it was still a child's clear voice so it didn't seem strange. Instead it revealed a strange chill. A chill ran down Xia Qifei's back. He knew that if the crime was more serious, it would be the murder of a prince. Even if thousands of lives were buried in this pit, it might not be enough. However, since this person was able to escape the Ming clan's pursuit when he was young and successfully rise up in the underworld to become an important figure in the martial world of Jiangnan, his state of mind was firm, and his thinking was meticulous. He saw that these nobles did not mobilize soldiers to wipe them out. Instead they took the risk to directly kill their way into the branch. Naturally, there was a deeper meaning behind this action. Thus he was not truly afraid. He just didn't know what exactly these nobles and Jingdo wanted. Xia Qifei gritted his teeth and gave up the backbone that people of Jianghu valued the most. He knelt down on one knee in front of Fan Xian and said sincerely, "I know it is difficult for me to bear this crime. Seeing that Your Excellency is deep and that you have not been harmed in the slightest, I ask that Your Excellency cut me into 1,000 pieces. You must also spare my reckless and ignorant brothers." This was a superficial effort he made after he had some confidence. Fan Xian didn't know if he didn't see it or if he admired the other party's quick-wittedness. He nodded approvingly and said, "Master Xia is indeed a true hero who loves his subordinates." The flowery sedan chair was carried by everyone. At this moment, Xia Qifei's way of referring to himself had already changed from I to Xia, and then Xia to a commoner. His aura became lower and lower. However, Fan Xian went from directly calling him by his name to Master Xia, until now, Master Xia. Step by step, he was acknowledging that the other party had a certain speaking identity. Fan Xian only said one sentence and then stopped. To the side, the third prince's heart chilled. He knew that his teacher didn't like him interrupting earlier, so he wanted him to play the role of the villain. However, as a prince he would not be afraid of the so-called Jianghu's grudges. In a clear voice he said, "Master Xia's words came a bit too late. The bandits that night have all been killed by the guards and thrown into the river." Ah! Xia Qifei was stunned. He hadn't thought that these Jingdo officials would be even more ruthless than bandits. They didn't even leave a single life behind. It was as if he could see the bodies of Guan Wumei and his brothers floating in the river. His heart ached and his anger rose wildly. However, his face only showed sorrow and no grudge. He was truly a skilled actor. Fan Xian said evenly, "The way I do things is different from your rules. Since those people came on the boat and used knives, naturally they cannot be left with their lives. If I truly soften my heart and let them go, once this matter gets back to Jingdo and the court is angry, I'm afraid their fates will be even worse. It will also bring disaster to their families. Xia Qifei was silent and didn't say anything. A moment later, he repeated his initial words. What orders do you have for coming here today? The other party's words had already been made clear. The matter of the robbery on the boat would temporarily be washed clean with the blood of a dozen brothers. This matter would be put aside, so naturally they would discuss other matters. Fan Xian waved his hand. All of his subordinates accepted their orders and left the outer hall. The third prince jumped down from his chair and also prepared to leave. Unexpectedly, he stayed behind. There were only 3 people left in the room. No one knew what kind of struggle and whispers were going on in Xia Qifei's heart. For a figure of the underworld like him, to be able to see 2 princes at the same time was a blessing he had never imagined. I am Fan Xian. Fan Xian's expression was gentle as he openly revealed his identity. Although Xia Qifei had vaguely guessed the other party's background, he still couldn't stop his heart from trembling and his legs from weakening. The story of this young man had long become a kind of legend among the people of the kingdom of Qin. He wasn't even 20 years old, but he was already the most powerful commissioner in the Overwatch Council. He composed poems in front of the palace, killed people on the streets, uncovered the scandal of the spring examination, went to northern Qi to fight for begonias, collected books and came back to bully the princes. In the short span of 2 years, this originally nameless illegitimate son of an assistant minister had become the most famous person in the world. Whether it was literature, martial arts, or power, he was already at the top. Who knew how many idle conversations in the countryside? Fan Xian had already become the object of envy and longing for all young men. This included Xia Qifei. Furthermore, because of his past, Xia Qifei felt some admiration for the commissioner he had never met. But now he had offended the commissioner. Xia Qifei knew all too well what would happen to those who offended Fan Xian. Roughly speaking, those who had fallen to Fan Xian's hands included the former Minister of Rights, Guiyu, the Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, and the Imperial Censor of the Left, Guizheng. Because of this young man, the Imperial Censor of the Imperial Censor had been beaten twice, the second prince had been placed under house arrest, and the eldest princess had been forced to hand over the palace treasury. Fan Xian's identity became more and more bizarre with all these things. The son-in-law of the Prime Minister, the illegitimate son of the Emperor. For the people of the wilderness around the Qing kingdom, the people and matters in the center of Jingdou always carried a natural air of mystery. For a person like Fan Xian, even his name was embroidered with gold, making it hard for people to look at him directly. Regardless of what Xia Qifei was thinking, his face was still full of shock. He neatly straightened the front of his robe and knelt on the ground, giving Fan Xian a heavy bow. Commoner Xia Qifei greets the commissioner. After a long silence, Fan Xian did not let him rise. He only looked at him with great interest. A moment later he said quietly, "Seventh young master of the Ming dynasty, I truly hope you can be more sincere. At least when you bow, it is best if you use your real name." Xia Qifei's pupils constricted. He suddenly raised his head and looked directly into Fan Xian's seemingly warm but actually aggressive eyes. His right hand had already unconsciously dropped down, ready to launch a thunderous strike at any moment. Seventh young master of the Ming dynasty. These 3 words, which he had not heard in a long time, burrowed into his ears like 2 poisonous snakes tearing at Xia Qifei's brain. Amidst his incomparable shock, a ruthlessness grew in his heart. How could the other person know of his past? If this news got out, how could that large family that had been deeply rooted in Jiangnan for 100 years let him go? Even if he had the Jiangnan water bandits, there was no chance of victory. There is no need to feel for the dagger in your boots. Fan Xian didn't know that Xia Qifei was thinking so many twists and turns in his heart. He only watched his movements and couldn't resist smiling. Of course Master Xia knows. What I am best at is this kind of thing. Fan Xian made a gesture to help him up. Xia Qifei took the opportunity to stand, but his entire person was still in a completely alert state. His ears listened to the movements outside the room. He didn't know if the arrangements he had the advisor make earlier had been completed. In this dangerous situation, although he guessed that Commissioner Fan might be threatening him or something, he still had to plan for the worst and prepare for a life-and-death struggle. It was as if the third prince did not sense the danger and watched the conversation between the two with great interest. Your mother was probably beaten to death by the old matriarch of the current Ming family. Fan Xian was combing through the intelligence reports in the council. Xia Qifei's eyes reddened. It was as if he was ready to charge forward and kill Fan Xian at any moment. As the head of the water bandits, he knew who he was facing. The 9th-level Commissioner Fan was a figure comparable to Northern Cheese Haitang. Even if he risked his life, he would not be able to kill him on the spot. Ever since you were a child, you were abused by that big brother of yours. Fan Xian looked at him and furrowed his brows. Master Xia, please don't take offense. I don't want to bring up your sad past. I just want you to understand that I want to do business with you, and this business must be built on the hatred between you and the Ming family. If you didn't hate the Ming family enough, I wouldn't have come to find you. Xia Qifei's aura relaxed. He closed his eyes and calmed his emotions. In a low voice, he said, "What business does Sir want to discuss with me? The thing you want to do, I can help you." Speaking of business, Fan Xian's words became more direct. "I know that Master Xia has been short on silver recently, and I have silver." Of course Fan Xian had silver. The Danbo bookstore, Baoyue brothel, the 6 ministries of Yamen, and people like Lao Dai in the palace had all used the name of rectification to scoop up real money. Added together, it had already reached a shocking level. But, in the wealthy and populous land of Jiangnan, it was still a far cry from those large families that had been around for many years. However, everyone under heaven knew that Commissioner Fan's family had a father who was the god of wealth. His family managed the national treasury and the internal treasury. If someone said that the Fan manor didn't have money, even someone like third sister-in-law wouldn't believe it. Xia Qifei had guessed that Fan Xian would threaten him, but he hadn't guessed that Fan Xian was actually prepared to help him. For a moment he didn't come back to his senses. In a daze he asked, "Sir, are you talking about the matter of the palace treasury opening in March? You and I are both people who do practical things, so let's be more direct," Fan Xian said calmly. "In March the palace treasury will open its bidding. In previous years, it would certainly be the Cui and Ming families' possessions. However, this year the Cui family has already collapsed. Naturally there will be big changes. If Master Xia wants to intervene, then there is only one chance. Unfortunately, I will be presiding over this matter this year. I will give you the right to enter and enough silver to take over the relevant shares." In reality, no one knew that Fan Xian had a sum of silver in his hands. This was where his greatest confidence came from. Xia Qifei furrowed his brows tightly. A moment later he replied, "The commissioner is generous." He didn't immediately reply because he knew what a terrifying organization the Overwatch Council was. Those who were hooked to the Overwatch Council could often only pay with their lives in the end. If Fan Xian knew what he was thinking, he would give him a more fitting description, making a deal with the devil. "Explain what I need you to do." Fan Xian didn't care about the other party's retreat. He smiled warmly and laid out his price. "The water bandits are yours. If you succeed in the future, the Ming family will also be yours. I won't even directly ask for the relevant profits." Xia Qifei's brows furrowed even tighter. There was no such kind Overwatch Council official in the world. As expected, after Fan Xian took a sip of cold tea, he very naturally said, "What should be yours is yours, but you, this person must be of the Overwatch Council." After Fan Xian said this, he took out a seemingly simple-looking token from his clothes and gently placed it on the smooth surface of the blackwood table. In a quiet voice he said, "The 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Jiangnan Road, the rank is not high. Don't feel wronged." Wronged? A Jianghu bandit leader suddenly became a court official, and a supervisor who held the power to supervise the governance of officials. Wronged? Only an idiot would feel wronged. Xia Qifei was shocked by the price Fan Xian had laid out. Although he knew that after he entered the Overwatch Council, regardless of whether he controlled the Ming family or the Jiangnan water bandits, he would never be able to break away from this organization. In the future, how the large profits related to the palace treasury would be distributed would still be up to the Overwatch Council. No, perhaps it would only be Commissioner Fan's personal word. To be able to obtain a large amount of money, have a secret official identity, and obtain the approval of Commissioner Fan, the head of the palace treasury, to participate in the competition for the first time, Xia Qifei had the confidence to defeat that rusty large family. He knew that in this life he would never again encounter such a good opportunity, but he was still hesitant. First, it would be difficult for him to be free in the future. To become a loyal dog under Fan Xian for someone who was used to wandering the Jianghu, it was not something he was willing to do. Furthermore, he did not completely trust Fan Xian. Second, the Overwatch Council's reputation was too bad. If the news that he had secretly taken a position got out, even if he had great power in the future, his reputation would be completely ruined. Thus he made his last struggle. Perhaps he wanted to preserve the thread of bravery in his heart. He stared somewhat rudely into Fan Xian's eyes and said, Sir, I truly do not know why I should accept this deal. Fan Xian asked curiously. Does Master Xia not want to take back the Ming family? That family originally belonged to you. According to what I know in the old Ming Master's will, the first name on the list was Ming Qingqing. Ming Qingqing was Xia Qifei's original name. He shivered slightly and gritted his teeth. It is not that I do not understand the situation, it is just that there are too many ways to take revenge. I am now the head of the Jiangnan water bandits. If I want to defeat the Ming family, there are many ways. As for the matter of the palace treasury, perhaps I have thought wrongly. The Ming family has great wealth and power. How can I win against them on the surface? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and smiled. The night is dark and the wind is high. Kill people. I believe you have this ability and decisiveness. However, the facts of these years have proven that you are not such a crazy person. You want to risk the destruction of the Jiangnan water bandits to burn down the Ming family manor. Putting aside whether or not you have this ability, even if you did, how would you convince yourself? The water bandits are wanted by the government, and the orphan and widow are homeless in the world. Is this a scene you want to see? Or do you think that with this kind of ending, after you die happily, you will still have the face to see the old bandit master who saved you, helped you to your position, and treated you with kindness as heavy as a mountain? He spoke in an orderly manner. His imposing manner was not very aggressive, but it was precisely like this that he gently pointed out the weak spot in Xia Qifei's heart. His powerful persuasiveness began to invade Xia Qifei's thoughts along with his analysis, causing his expression to darken. Without waiting for Xia Qifei to come back to his senses, Fan Xian continued warmly, what Master Xia wants most is not just revenge, but to take back the Ming family and then stand proudly in front of your older brother who is over 50 years old. If killing people could solve the problem, you wouldn't have waited so many years and used brute force to do things. The Jiangnan water bandits have been destroyed. Even if you killed all of the Ming family, where would the Ming family be? Would the things you want to take back still exist? Fan Xian looked calmly into his eyes. From my standpoint, I advise you not to make this choice. The goal you've worked so hard for so many years will disappear like smoke in front of your eyes. That feeling must not be good. Preserving the Ming family in one piece is presumably the old Ming master's last wish. Although the Ming family has treated you detestable and sinister, your father did not owe you and your mother anything. Xia Qifei stood silently where he was, motionless. It was as if he was still digesting Fan Xian's words. This man, who was used to being on the edge of a knife's edge, suddenly thought of a reality. The young man in front of him had many similarities to his own experiences. Was he also seeking to take back what originally belonged to him? For example, the palace treasury. That was originally the Yi family's property. Did he want to completely take it back? Fan Xian was not angry because of his tactful refusal earlier. Rather, he patiently waited for the result of his thoughts. He had confidence in his words. More importantly, he had confidence in the seventh young master of the Ming family. Their similar backgrounds allowed Fan Xian to clearly capture the other's true thoughts. Master Xia, what you want is the Ming family's property, not a few hundred heads. After a long silence, Xia Qifei threw out his last question. Commissioner, there is one thing I do not understand. Please speak. Naturally, your trip this time is to prepare to take over the palace treasury. The Cui and Ming families have controlled the external supply channels for a long time. They are too deeply connected to that side. Naturally, you have to deal with them. Xia Qifei forcefully swallowed the words, eldest princess. His face flushed slightly. But why do you think so highly of me? Given your power and position, you can easily destroy the Cui family. Getting rid of the Ming family would not be a difficult matter. You can completely do this yourself and do not need me to do anything. The Cui family. Fan Xian shook his head. Their situation is different from the Ming family. As for why I have not appeared, it is not convenient for me to do so. The word "not convenient" was the true meaning of officialdom. He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and now he also had to manage the palace treasury. The rules of the court were strict. The palace treasury was only responsible for the production, but the export had to be obtained by private merchants. Whether it was council business or private business, it was impossible for Fan Xian to stand on the stage. Thus, he needed to find a trustworthy and convenient spokesperson. For Fan Xian, the situation of the Cui family and the Ming family were not the same. When he was dealing with the Cui family, he had made long and solid preparations. After a long period of silence and false civility, he had Yan Bingyun take the lead and strike like lightning. Naturally, he had succeeded in every endeavor. Now that the Ming family had learned from their mistakes, they had long made sufficient preparations. It was already a difficult task to catch those unscrupulous merchants from their shipping channels and accounts. Of course, the biggest difference was that Fan Xian had an absolutely valiant helper in the Cui family. That person had the most powerful power other than the Qing royal family, the young emperor of northern Qi. However, the people related to the Ming family were concentrated in Dongyi and overseas. Fan Xian had once killed 2 of Sigu Jian's female grand disciples. The Qin court, including him, had made Dongyi bear the blame countless times. The grudges between the two sides were too deep. If he wanted to join hands with Dongyi to topple the Ming family, Fan Xian knew that he did not have this ability. Fan Xian stood up and used his finger to gently tap the token on the table. Leave this token here for now. Before tonight, give me a reply. Of course, you should know what you need to prepare if you decide. Xia Qifei respectfully moved to the side and did not directly answer his words. He only said, Sir, coming today is like a god descending from the heavens. Although you do not like to disturb the people, the momentum is already there. I'm afraid it will not be easy to hide. It was unclear if these words were flattery or if there was some other meaning hidden within. Fan Xian glanced at him and said, At the moment, Master Xia is still someone who accidentally kicked an iron plate. You play this role well first. As for my whereabouts, why do I need to hide them? There is a boat on the river. I will have to trouble Master Xia's subordinates to escort it along the way. I have a chest of silver with me. I don't want to be remembered by thieves again. Xia Qifei lowered his head firmly and said in a low voice, Thank you for your kindness in not killing me. Fan Xian turned around and pulled the third prince down from the chair. Only now did Xia Qifei realize that during this conversation he seemed to have slightly neglected this little noble. He couldn't help feeling a little nervous, but he didn't have time to do anything to make up for it. His mind suddenly jumped and he hesitantly said, Sir, if the people open up in March and I challenge the Ming family, they will certainly become suspicious. At that time, you stand on my side, so naturally I will stand on your side. Fan Xian smiled slightly at him. Holding the third prince's hand, he walked outside and threw down his last words. Master Xia, you make your decision quickly. I admire you very much. The Shazhou branch of the Jiangnan water bandits was completely silent, deathly silent. The chief had already given the strictest order to keep their mouths shut. Although he didn't say anything explicitly, the brothers all knew something big had happened. They only dared to guess and didn't dare to randomly spread it. Xia Qifei sat in the chair that still had some warmth. His expression was dark and uncertain. No one knew what he was thinking. The advisor walked in from outside and leaned close to his ear to say, The Navy has already sealed the camp. I don't know what has happened. Xia Qifei's expression darkened. In a low voice he said, No matter. As long as this matter is settled, Old Shin should be fine. The advisor said slowly, They have already detained many of our boats. Following your orders, there have been no conflicts. However, after those masters in Jingdo left, our boats were also released. Xia Qifei lowered his head and said, This is the other party showing their strength. He smiled coldly. In their eyes we are nothing more than ants. Chief, everything has been prepared. The servant is currently washing his sword in the back room, waiting for your order. Xia Qifei still didn't give the order. His brows were furrowed deeply. A moment later, he suddenly said faintly, Advisor Qian, do you think this should be done? His hand gently stroked the Overwatch Council token. The token was very smooth. No one knew how long it had been made. The advisor said in a trembling voice, Everything is according to the chief's orders. I don't dare to speak out of turn. Xia Qifei closed his eyes and said, The people from Jingdo seem to be used to doing things this way and overestimate their own strength. Even if they have those 7th or 8th level ace guards by their side, if we turn out in full strength, we still have a chance. The advisor cursed in his heart. You clearly know that is impossible, yet you still say this. You just don't want to carry that bad reputation and want me to help convince you. He said, That leader of the guard's strength has already reached the peak. If he was placed in the Jiangnan martial world, he would be able to establish his own sect. Chief must think carefully. The key is that person himself. Xia Qifei opened his eyes and said, In reality, the conditions Fan Xian had given him were enough to move him. However, he was a master of a region. Now he was going to become someone else's subordinate and would never be able to rise again. For a moment it was difficult to accept. Earlier he had been speaking humbly with Fan Xian. On the other hand, he had made preparations through the advisor to kill. Because the most profound and unfathomable servant of the water bandits was coincidentally at the Shazhou branch, the Jiangnan water bandits had the ability to fight back. However, he also knew in his heart that the so-called kill was just to comfort himself so that he wouldn't appear too useless. Xia Qifei sighed and felt strangely sad. He knew that the Jiangnan water bandits were going to become the court's dogs in his hands. This kind of feeling was very embarrassing and uncomfortable. He stood up and looked at the advisor's face that looked like he wanted to cry. He knew that he was afraid he would make an extremely unwise choice. He couldn't help but unconsciously pat his back, wanting to comfort him. Everywhere his hand touched was wet and cold. After a moment of shock, Xia Qifei realized that the advisor had broken out in a cold sweat from the people coming from Jingdo in this cold winter. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly at himself. It seemed that the pressure of imperial power and the Overwatch Council was not something he, a common tyrant, could resist. He finally made up his mind. With a serious expression he said, "Immediately disperse all the arrangements. On the surface watch that ship. In secret protect the safety of that ship. We must ensure that Jingdo ship arrives safely in Suzhou. And on land? By that person's side. There are many strong people by his side. We don't need to be meddlesome." "Yes." The advisor nodded his head in agreement. He then furrowed his brows and said, "But, the old servant, he is preparing to make a move." Xia Qifei fell silent. He knew that this matter was complicated. The matter of secretly defecting to the Overwatch Council could not be exposed too early in the Jianghu. Otherwise he would not be able to control it and the pressure outside would also increase. As for the old servant, that was even more troublesome. This servant was the most mysterious ace of the Jiangnan water bandits. In terms of seniority he was the uncle of the old bandit master and his own granduncle disciple. He rarely made a move, but he was the secret treasure of the Jiangnan water bandits. If that old-fashioned and stubborn old servant knew that he, an outsider master, wanted to completely rely on the government? Xia Qifei suddenly shivered. Only now did he realize that he seemed to have underestimated the complexity of the matter. After a moment of silence, a ruthless expression suddenly appeared on his face. In a low voice he said, "Go summon the personal guards of the inner hall." The advisor's heart chilled. He knew that the master of the Jiangnan water bandits was preparing to get rid of the old servant because of that matter, but could they do it? An hour later, the head of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, carried a bowl of chicken soup and respectfully came to the back garden, preparing to offer it to the most special person in the water bandits, the old servant. Behind him hid his most trusted assassins, hoping to finish the job in one fell swoop. He stood outside the door for a while but no one came to open the door. The courtyard was deathly silent. Xia Qifei pushed open the door and walked in. His face was calm. Granduncle disciple? No one answered him. Xia Qifei's gaze swept around, and his heart suddenly froze. His hand loosened and the chicken soup fell to the ground, dripping everywhere. He saw an old man with silver hair and a beard sitting on a praying mat next to the bed. The old man's hair was tied into a tight bun. He wore a sword robe and a long sword was tied to his waist. His entire body emanated a murderous intent. It was clear that this old servant had already adjusted his breathing to the most perfect state and was ready to draw his sword and kill at any moment. But the old servant could no longer kill. His round eyes shone with a strong sense of unwillingness and anger. If looks could kill, then it would truly be a shocking sight. A terrifying and delicate wound split open his throat and went straight to the back of his neck. After the wound, fresh blood flowed down the old servant's back and onto the ground. The old servant was already dead. The assassin who killed the old servant had a shocking sword intent, so there was no blood in front of the old servant's body. All of the blood had been forced behind him by the power of the sword. Xia Qifei trembled as he walked towards the body of the elder. He looked at the scene in front of him with some disbelief. He was prepared to betray his master and kill his ancestors, but when it really happened he felt that it was a bit inconceivable. He was prepared to put dozens of lives on the line, but who could kill this old man in such a silent manner? A note floated down. Xia Qifei glanced at it with a panicked gaze. He only saw that it said, "You had that thought but I still gave you a chance. He had a murderous intent so I killed him." The body of the Jiangnan water bandit leader began to tremble uncontrollably. It was not until now that he truly understood the power of the Overwatch Council. It was not something a gang could contend against. The other party was helping him clear the last obstacle to his surrender. It was also a final invitation and warning to him. The following does not count as text. After I woke up today there was a power outage. My mother and my retired colleagues went out to play. Only my father, brother-in-law, and I were left at home. The 3 men stayed in the quiet room in a daze. I didn't know when the electricity would come back. I was worried. It was not until the afternoon that someone finally thought to ask the property management. They were shocked to find that the entire area had electricity. Our unit also had electricity. Even the door opposite had electricity. The 3 men were shocked but also happy. They thought that there was a problem with the wiring in the house. They could use this opportunity to show off their skills, so they began to work everywhere. In the end, after a long time, the 3 fake electricians still could not figure out what was going on. It was not until the end that they discovered that the power outside had been cut off by the electricity bureau, that their home owed electricity. Chapter 338. That night, there was a glimmer of nervousness in the silence of Shazhou. The usually bustling night streets had become particularly quiet. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one knew exactly what had happened. On the street to the east of the gambling house were the cleanest and most comfortable inns in this large province. Usually, if it was the wealthy families traveling from south to north, they all liked to book rooms here. Although Fan Xian, who had come to Shazhou, was a naked second generation, he had not been infected with too many of the habits of a second generation. Although his life was not simple, it was still simple. Thus he only booked the quietest floor at the top. Xia Qifei stood obediently in the corner of the room. In front of Fan Xian he carefully put the token into his clothes. He then signed his name on the document and pressed his bright red handprint on it. He then respectfully handed over a brown paper bag. Fan Xian glanced at the document and nodded his head. Smiling, he said, "Sir Xia, now we are one family." Xia Qifei cried bitterly in his heart. Once he signed this document, he naturally became one family with the young official in front of him. However, there were all kinds of people in the family. The other party was a young master, but he was like a slave. However, he knew that in this life he probably would not have the ability or opportunity to vent the resentment in his heart. The heroes of the Jianghu were able to pick up and let go. Since he had chosen this path, he would truly walk it down. Thus, he tidied the front of his clothes and stepped forward. Nimbly he knelt down and said, "I am Xia Ming Qingqing. Greetings, sir." After he finished speaking, he did not kneel down. A pair of hands had already steadied his body. Fan Xian gazed at him and said, "Regardless of how Sir Xia thinks of me, since we have entered the council, although you and I are officials of the court and have a hierarchy, we must be brothers who treat each other with sincerity. I am not strict in my demands on external things." Xia Qifei was slightly startled. Fan Xian continued, "Master Xia must be like everyone else in the world. You have some sort of prejudice against the Overwatch Council, but you don't know much about our internal relationships." After a pause he smiled and said, "To put it bluntly, we are like a pack of wolves raised by the imperial court, but there are too many lions and tigers out there. If we want to survive, work for the imperial court and work for the benefit of the people, then don't care about those filthy words. The key is our internal unity. A pack of wolves can have a leader, but there will never be internal strife." Xia Qifei frowned and replied, "This subordinate understands." "You don't understand." Fan Xian said very straightforwardly, "I know these words are very boring and empty words, but let's take it slowly. You will experience this kind of feeling in the future in council affairs. Yes, I understand you. After all, you are a hero of your generation. Previously, you were purposely suppressed by me in the division, so you must feel a bit uncomfortable." Xia Qifei's heart trembled. Fan Xian's expression softened. He chuckled and said, "At that time, you were a commoner and I was an official. Naturally, there was such a difference. Now your status is different." Xia Qifei didn't know what to say and could only remain silent. "The people are so stupid. So, you can use them and take care of them, but you can't trust them. You can't let them have some kind of wrong judgment and want to climb on top of you. As an official of the Overwatch Council, although I stand on the side of the Emperor and the commoners to supervise the governance, I can only trust the Emperor. The commoners, the Overwatch Council only needs to maintain enough authority and pressure. Of course, this is just my personal feeling." Fan Xian gently rolled up his sleeves. "It may not be correct. The people were forgetful." Ever since that rainy night, Fan Xian's heart had grown cold. Later, the longer he stayed in Jingdo, the colder his heart became. He had long taken Uncle Wu Zhu's words as an understanding of life. There was no one you could trust in this world. Other than individual people, the people you couldn't trust also included the Qin Kingdom's muddle-headed commoners. Naturally, this also included the Emperor. However, Fan Xian would never voice these thoughts out loud at any time. In the room, other than Fan Xian and Fan Xian, there was only Su Wenmao of the Qinian unit. Fan Xian pointed at Su Wenmao and said, "Sir Su, I transferred you from the first bureau to my side. I don't think you have any desire to work by my side, but if you want to enter the capital in the future, it is not impossible." Xia Qifei thought to himself that being a local tycoon in Jiangnan would be much happier than entering the capital, but he sincerely said, "It's all up to you to promote me." Fan Xian shook his head. "Don't tell lies. However, the council can indeed help you do many things, so don't blame me. In the end, we are just using each other." He then said, "Sir Su is the witness to your admission today. In the future, you can contact Sir Su for any related communication methods and uploading matters. In a moment you two can talk about it together." He then said to Su Wenmao, "Quickly familiarize Sir Su with the manual and regulations." Su Wenmao bowed in a low voice. The two of them knew that Commissioner Fan had finished giving instructions, so they bowed again and left the room. As soon as the two of them left the room, the third prince's small body floated out from the inner suite like a ghost. He walked to Fan Xian's side and quietly asked, "Teacher, is this how the Overwatch Council accepts people?" "This is a special case." Fan Xian politely invited the third prince to sit. "What your highness heard earlier is not often seen in the council. When the Overwatch Council accepts people, they first examine them for a long time. Generally speaking, we are used to choosing people from the armies of each province. This was a habit developed when the Emperor organized the Overwatch Council before the first northern expedition. Of course, later on, we began to pay special attention to the scholars who failed the spring examinations. After all, if they can't even read, then it is not easy. All outstanding talents, after they have no hope of passing the examinations, are targets that the Overwatch Council does its best to absorb. However, the Council's biggest taboo is to accept people who already have considerable power or who have a background behind them." The third prince furrowed his brows and said, "This Xia Qifei is the master of the Jiangnan water bandits." "That is why it is a special case," Fan Xian explained patiently. Generally speaking, people like Xia Qifei can at most be allowed to move around on the periphery of council affairs. It is very rare to have him take up the post of supervisor. "Why is it a special case?" The third prince appeared particularly interested and eager to learn about these matters. This time, Fan Xian did not reprimand him for using his status as a prince to place too much emphasis on detailed matters. He evenly said, "Because this time the emperor has ordered me to Jiangnan to clean out the palace treasury, I will have to face a group of wealthy merchants and notables in Jiangnan. Thus, the Overwatch Council needs to find a local person in Jiangnan, and a person they can absolutely control." "What?" The third prince appeared very confused. Although he was already vicious and merciless at such a young age, given his status as a prince, other than taking a vicious blow from Fan Xian at Baoyue brothel, he had not encountered any setbacks. Thus, he could not imagine the complexity and difficulty of Jiangnan's government affairs. Fan Xian glanced at him. Looking at the child's serious gaze, he couldn't help but feel it was a bit funny. However, he also deeply admired Yi Guipin, who was deep in the palace. How could such a charmingly naive concubine raise such a tough, studious and powerful little prince who was willing to lower his status? He was afraid that his relative concubine was not simple. Jiangnan has been run by Xinjiang for too long. Fan Xian did not avoid mentioning the eldest princess in front of him. In a dozen years, this place has already become a piece of iron. Even if some people are enemies of the Cui and Xia families, there are always inextricably linked interests in all areas. No one wants the present situation to change too much. The losses that change brings are things these people do not want to see. For them, we have come a long way from Jingdo. For them, we are a powerful variable. When external forces attack them, even if there are cracks in the iron plate, they will temporarily come together to fight against the external enemy. Thus, we need a grain of sand that already exists in the iron plate. We need this grain of sand to grow larger and larger until it gradually cracks the iron plate, making it difficult for it to return to its original appearance. The third prince furrowed his brows and said, "First of all, the grain of sand may not have this ability. If we help him, what difference is there from us appearing ourselves? Most importantly, it is not convenient for us to appear." Fan Xian also had a headache. He sighed and said, "Your Highness, you don't know how deeply rooted the concept of territory is in this country. I can have Shaoshi open a branch of Baoyue brothel and have Dambo bookstore open throughout Suzhou. If I truly touch on the fundamental interests of the Jiangnan people, I'm afraid it will provoke a collective attack." "A collective attack?" Who would it be? The Ming family, the richest merchant family in Jiangnan. I have killed a few young masters, so the salt merchants who have a deep hatred for me. The officials of all levels who have long been fed by the eldest princess. Starting with the second-level Admiral Ling of Jiangnan Road, all the way to the old soldiers guarding the city gates in Suzhou. Fan Xian smiled like he was playing a game and moved his fingers. The shopkeepers of all levels in the palace treasury, the girls selling prostitutes on the street, the old men performing in front of the temples, as long as they are Jiangnan people, they will not like us giving orders. The third prince paused slightly and said sinisterly, if they want to attack, then attack. Am I supposed to be afraid of them? I'm not afraid of being afraid, Fan Xian said, amused. But what is that saying? The law does not punish the masses. If Jiangnan truly becomes chaotic, these people from all walks of life have plenty of ways to make the people full of grievances and have no way of making a living. If that day really comes, do you think the court in Jingdo will discuss whether they will chop off tens of thousands of heads to give me courage or remove my black veil to appease the people of Jiangnan? The third prince paused and thought to himself, given father's personality, Fan Xian would certainly not suffer much, but he would still move him back to the capital. Once he thought of how, as the teacher of the third prince, he would be made to suffer so much, the third prince felt very depressed in his heart. Fan Xian seemed to guess what he was thinking and laughed out loud. Of course, the matter is not so troublesome. Your Highness also knows that the Overwatch Council is not to be trifled with, and the Emperor cannot be completely gentle. I am only estimating the situation to be a bit more difficult. His smile gradually faded. Calmly he said, if I really have to kill people to establish power, I don't mind carrying this infamy. The third prince shook his head and thought that if he really killed too many people, it would not be easy to clean up the matter. If the imperial censorate in the capital started to make a fuss again, could father really beat the imperial censors to death? Father was an emperor who wanted to leave his name in the annals of history. It would be better to have Xia Qifei, who had just been subdued, kill them. His eyes lit up, but he didn't dare tell his teacher of his sudden inspiration. He had no idea that his teacher, who appeared gentle but was actually ruthless, had made such a lowly arrangement. Cough, cough. He coughed twice and said, then what about the navy? The navy garrison is actually colluding with the head of the water bandits. How will the Overwatch Council investigate this matter? Fan Xian lowered his head to look at the leather bag and casually said, there is no need to investigate this matter. Unexpectedly, the third prince furrowed his brows and said viciously, how can we not investigate? The military is an important weapon of a country. The navy in this area of Sha Lake is our court's heavy military and is directly titled the Jiangnan Navy. Even something has gone wrong here. If we don't investigate it thoroughly, how will the court live? Qing Kingdom is known as the most powerful country in the world, how will we live? Fan Xian glanced at the third prince in surprise. From these childish and somewhat unclear words, he could hear that the child truly cared about this matter. He couldn't help but feel a bit confused. In a flash he understood. It looked like this young master truly had that kind of ambition. He couldn't resist smiling and handed the leather bag in his hand to the third prince. The problem with the navy is not too big. Of course, the garrison will be unlucky. I think the admiral of the navy will have to give me an explanation after this matter happens, he said quietly. The river was also a test. The navy's military discipline is not bad. The third prince didn't want to continue. He only lowered his head and flipped through the things in the leather bag. The more he looked, the more frightened he became. On it were all the secret communications between the Jiangnan water bandits and the various officials these years. The accounts were clear. Although it was impossible for the names of the officials to be signed on the receipts, if they were to really investigate, they would probably be able to uncover a number of officials. Fan Xian said, this is the so-called proof of allegiance. Xia Qifei giving these things to me is the same as giving the heads of those officials and himself to me. Only after both sides have revealed everything can everyone be at ease. The third prince suddenly raised his head and said with some disbelief, Xia Qifei is going to continue to be a spy. Your Highness understands very quickly. You are indeed intelligent, Fan Xian said with praise. If we want to capture these officials, we'll capture them. It's just a matter of time. If they still don't understand the situation and want to stand against the court, then they will be captured. As for Xia Qifei, he will continue to be the master of the Jiangnan water bandits and continue to make friends with the navy and the various officials. This is very good. From Fan Xian's standpoint, the so-called opposing side of the court was naturally the side in Xinjiang. The third prince gazed at Fan Xian excitedly and said, Teacher, good plan. Fan Xian rubbed his hair and smiled self-mockingly. What kind of bullsh*t good plan is this? Everyone can think of it. However, no one has as many resources as the Overwatch Council. If we can't find out Xia Qifei's background, then we can't control him. Naturally, we can't do anything. It was rare to hear him say a swear word, but the third prince laughed and said, "Teacher, you are an immortal poet of your generation. So, you also know how to swear." Fan Xian laughed even louder. What bullsh*t immortal poet? Even an immortal poet has to go to the bathroom. Master Zhuang still has 2 concubines. How can there be a person in this world who is completely made of crystal from the inside out? Even if there is, I'm afraid it would freeze everyone around him to death. The third prince chuckled and suddenly asked mischievously, "Could it be, father also knows how to swear?" Fan Xian was startled. Looking at the child, he became angry. This was forcing him to lie. He really wanted to swear. He laughed and scolded, "Go back and ask your wife." After talking and laughing for a while, the atmosphere became much more relaxed. The third prince suddenly thought of what Xia Qifei had said earlier and asked with great interest, "Teacher, I heard the head thief say that in a few days, there will be some kind of meeting by West Lake to evaluate the martial cultivation of the heroes of Jiangnan. It is a rare occasion. Let's also go and see?" Vulgar, so vulgar. Fan Xian smiled. It is just a fight between some common people. Your Highness is a prince, why go and join in the excitement? Jianghu, the third prince said with a worried frown. I'm truly curious. His eyes lit up. Teacher is a rarely seen 9th-level ace. When the time comes, you can disguise yourself and fight for the position of alliance leader. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? In the future you can write it into a story and spread it under heaven. More and more vulgar. Fan Xian smiled. If I really did that, who knows how it would spread in Jingdo. It would be more than enough to write me a dozen chapters. In the end, the emperor would still criticize me for being young and impulsive. Besides, with you by my side, how could I personally go to dangerous places? He finally said, "Of course the Overwatch Council will certainly send people to watch. The people of the 4th Bureau are probably already waiting by West Lake. I will have Su Wenmao make a trip there." Only now did the third prince know that Fan Xian had long planned this. He couldn't help feeling disappointed and sighed sorrowfully. No matter how ruthless this prince's personality was, he was still a child. The thought of not being able to join in the excitement and see the legendary martial assembly made him feel uncomfortable. It is late. Your Highness, please go and rest first. Fan Xian stood to send the guest off. When he saw the third prince to the door, the third prince suddenly stopped and didn't push open the door. Instead, he turned around, tilted his face and looked Fan Xian up and down with interest. He then said, "Teacher, why did father arrange for me to follow by your side and come with you to Jiangnan?" Fan Xian was startled. A moment later, he smiled slightly and said, "Your Highness, what are you thinking in your heart? Perhaps it is the Emperor's good intentions in arranging this." His words were fearsome and his intentions were punishable. The third prince's childish face immediately became serious. After thinking for a long time, he slowly nodded his head. He then asked, "Dare I ask where exactly is second cousin? I haven't seen him in many days. I miss him." Fan Xian knew he was asking about Fan Xixia. Looking at the third prince's face, he found that the second brothel owner's concern and longing for the big boss seemed to be sincere. He smiled and replied, "The Ministry of Justice has already sent out a wanted notice to capture him. How would I know?" The third prince was not the emperor. He didn't need to say too much. The third prince glanced at him angrily and asked one last question. "There is a question I have always wanted to ask you, teacher. Please speak, Your Highness." In the Hanging Temple, why did you come and save me?" The third prince looked at him with a glimmer of hope. Who knew what kind of answer he wanted to know? Fan Xian didn't even think. He smiled straightforwardly and said, "Because at that time, Your Highness was in danger. Naturally, I had to save you." It was clear that the third prince did not want this perfunctory answer. He continued to ask, "At that time? Father was in even more danger." Fan Xian's answer was even better. "I was closer to Your Highness." The third prince was angry and bitter. He angrily pushed open the wooden door and walked out. He thought to himself that this bastard indeed had a body of dough and a heart of stone. He wouldn't say anything clearly and liked to deliberately mystify things. Li Qingping, who had grown up in the emperor's family, had lived carefully under his mother's teachings. He was on good terms with the second prince, but he often went to the Eastern Palace to play. He was a small character that his brothers loved dearly. Inside he was very daring and had a maturity that far exceeded his age. This kind of personality was forced out. Looking at the hanging temple, everyone was only worried about the emperor's safety and did not care about the third prince's life or death. The crown prince was even more unbearable. After the incident, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He often thought back to that day when Fan Xian was incomparably heroic and stood in front of him. He had saved his life. Comparing the two, the third prince increasingly felt that this big cousin in name, the actual elder brother, was much cuter and more trustworthy than anyone else in the world. Fan Xian stood at the door and watched as the third prince followed the tiger guards into his bedroom. Only then did he turn around and enter the door with a warm smile on his face. He and the third prince had traveled south. The relationship between the two of them was a bit strange. The other was a prince and he was an official, but he also had the relationship of teacher and student. Furthermore, everyone knew that they were both children of the same father. However, the two of them were both smart people, so neither of them would bring this matter up, even if it was just testing each other. After all, in this world there were not many people as straightforward and daring as Cici. "Young master, it's time to sleep." Fan Xian was lost in thought when he was startled by the girl who dared to ask. Turning his head, he saw Cici holding a basin of steaming hot water and staring at him seriously. "Don't move around too much these next few days." As Fan Xian spoke, he stuck his feet into the hot water and gave a comfortable moan. After days of tiring travel, his mind was also a bit tired. He indeed needed to be scalded. Cici held a large square handkerchief and sat on the small bench in front of him. She looked at him without blinking. Fan Xian felt a bit scared by her gaze and unconsciously asked, "What is it?" Cici turned her head and glanced at the wooden door. She lowered her head and said in a quiet voice, "Young master, if you want to investigate the palace treasury, then investigate the palace treasury. Don't worry about other things." She was one of the few people Fan Xian had personally confirmed. Of course, she believed in his past. Although she was a straightforward and naive girl, her mind was very good. Perhaps it was because Fan Xian had fed her too many ghost stories since she was young that she had a natural sensitivity to certain things. These days she had watched the conversation and actions between Fan Xian and the third prince and faintly guessed that Fan Xian was preparing for the future. However, the matters of the emperor's family were still terrifying and untouchable existences in a girl's heart. She also did not see Fan Xian as someone from the palace, so she was naturally worried. Fan Xian's feet stopped stirring in the hot water and glanced at her with some surprise. After a moment of silence, he comfortingly said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I can't have this little guy suffer like Xia. I only hope that this trip to Jiangnan will open his eyes. Even if we disregard the future as a prince, even if he is to assist the crown prince in ruling the country, if he is more broad-minded, the world will be better off." Cici burst out in laughter. "It seems like my young master is a person who bemoans the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind." Fan Xian smiled and scolded, "What are you saying? Am I not? Too similar." Cici covered her mouth and laughed. "That's why it's a bit fake. How did you scold Master Xiao earlier? Now you've forgotten." "The two do not contradict each other," Fan Xian said seriously. "To be good to others doesn't mean you have to do everything according to them. How would the common people know how to protect their own interests? We can do this kind of thing. Then why do we do it?" Cici asked curiously. She came from a poor family and always hoped that the young master would say some kind and righteous words. This was what was meant by a woman's mind being difficult to guess. "Where do you get all these sighs of life? Tomorrow we'll be entering Jiangnan Road. Go to sleep, I'll pour the water myself." Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand. Cici chuckled but continued to look into his eyes. If she was alone in front of Fan Xian, she would always have a boldness that did not match her identity as a servant. Fan Xian was being pestered like a rascal. He slapped his thigh and slowly said, "Why do I do it? Of course, it's not because I bemoan the state of the universe and pity the fate of mankind. I don't have my mother's breadth of mind. I only hope for the world to be at peace, for there to be no wars on the borders and no famine or unrest in the inner regions. Even if I want to be a rich and idle person, I still want to ensure that there is peace and prosperity around me. Only then can I, the young master, retire at the age of 30. Only then can I enjoy the happiness of leisure. When all is said and done, I am just selfishly trying to cultivate an environment that will allow me to be happy in my later years." "Young master, what do you mean by retiring?" "Retire? Retire at 30? Although I can't be prime minister, I have to at least be a duke before I can return to Danzhou, right?" Cici said with great shock. You are already the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. In the future you will certainly take over old Sir Chen's position. You will no longer be able to enter the court or personally control the army. At 30 you will at most be a second-rank marquis. She said with a pained expression. Are you really going to return to Danzhou at 30? How can that be? Fan Xian had not thought that the thoughts he had occasionally revealed would make the girl anxious first. He smiled and said, It's not like I have to return to Danzhou. Northern Qi, Dongyi, Nanyue, the Western Man, and even the countries on the other side of the sea. We have to go visit them all. Only then will we not have wasted our lives. We can ride horses on the grasslands and take a boat on the ocean. We can walk slowly and see slowly. The barbarians in the West eat people, Cece said in horror. Speaking of the Western Man, Fan Xian couldn't help but think of the newest council report. He shook his head to clear his thoughts and returned to the present. He knew that what he said earlier was a seemingly beautiful but difficult to achieve ideal. However, he was already satisfied with his present life, other than that major matter. At this moment, Cece was still counting on her fingers. There are still 12 years. What is the young master prepared to do? Do what? Fan Xian said very seriously. Of course, it is to be a capable and powerful official. Above, I will be loyal to the emperor of the court. Below, I will supervise the governance of the officials. I will take down all those officials who are corrupt and take bribes. Cece was startled. A moment later she said with hidden bitterness, The young master is not an honest and upright official. The people closest to Fan Xian would certainly not believe what he said. Cece was already relatively polite. She did not directly point out that the young master was a grievously corrupt official. Fan Xian said innocently, There's nothing I can do about it. My father and father-in-law are known as the two biggest corrupt officials in the Qin kingdom. Their families are well-educated. Cece seriously retorted, But the young master is certainly not a corrupt official. Fan Xian sighed and stretched out his hands to rub his numb face. Sometimes, after pretending for so long, I almost don't know which side is the real me. This sentence is very bourgeois, right? Don't ask the young master what a bourgeois is. That's it. Go to sleep. In the inn, the oil lamp had already been extinguished. The waves that had been turned red did not happen. Letting Cece sleep on her own, Fan Xian climbed out of bed and put on a jacket. He was not in a hurry to move. Instead, he poured a cup of cold tea and downed it, dispelling the anger that was difficult to hide. He didn't light a lamp. In the dark night, he relied on his eyesight to walk to the window. He pushed open the window. A sky full of moonlight blew in along with the cold wind. Opposite the inn was Sha Lake. At this moment, the lake wind was gently blowing, making the wilted grass by the lake sway strangely. In the center of the lake was the moon, which was hard to tell if it was real or fake. The scenery was very beautiful. He withdrew his gaze from the lake below the inn and naturally turned it to the right. Fan Xian looked with no surprise at the black-clothed man sitting leisurely on the ledge in the air with his feet in the air. He knew that given the other party's realm, wanting to fall to his death was as impossible as wanting to drown himself in a basin. You know I have a woman in my room. Can you avoid it a little? Don't say it, this is another accident. Accident. The black-clothed man repeated these two words monotonously. Yun Jilan wanted to come to Hangzhou. I came to inform you. Fan Xian was slightly surprised, but his attention was still on the black-clothed man. He asked curiously, I have a question. In the past you followed beside the old man every day. Did you never sleep? The black-clothed man didn't answer this question. What happened to your white clothes? Although I don't know if that was your true appearance, you were much more handsome then. The black-clothed man remained silent. Although he was Fan Xian's subordinate, his status and power already allowed him to not answer too many of these boring and childish questions. I have a great question. You are always so mysterious and unpredictable. Even the emperor doesn't know you. Then how are you leading the 6th Bureau? You have to know you are the true leader of the 6th Bureau. That man is only an agent. I have my ways. This matter involved official business. The most powerful assassin in the Qin kingdom, the Shadow, finally opened his mouth to speak. Also, can you talk a little more? I know you worship that elder in my family, but you are not the same as him. You have to understand your identity as a civil servant. From the capital until now you have only said 3 sentences to me. I am very unhappy. There is a question I have always wanted to ask, but I have never had the chance to get an answer from you. In front of the Shadow, Fan Xian seemed more and more like a chatterbox. The Shadow hesitated a little and opened his mouth. Sir, please ask. A glimmer of a smile rose to the corner of Fan Xian's mouth. The question is, you stabbed me with a knife. How are you going to compensate me? Please allow me to be long-winded. In any case, everyone thinks I am long-winded. Yesterday I was electrocuted. Later, when I looked at the bill, my whole family vomited blood. The total owed is $11.60. So, please understand, I do not have financial problems. This only shows that my whole family is very lazy. But yesterday, there were many kind-hearted people in the book review section who sympathized with me and helped me get monthly votes. This made me very proud. So, I say I am poor, please give me more monthly votes. As for the matter of getting votes and monthly votes, I will write a short chapter at the end of the month to explain my thoughts. Of course, I think Fan Xian's thoughts are not correct. They are extremely hypocritical. Hypocritical to the point of being cute. Let me repeat, please do not equate the characters in the novel with the author. I am noble and pure. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 339. No one knew what the shadow had promised Fan Xian for him to accept the compensation for that accident. The next day he happily left Shazhou. That day there was a cold winter rain. It was cold and dreary. Like magic, Commissioner Fan and his group, who were stealthily moving through Jiangnan, disappeared into the winter forest on the hills outside Shazhou. That night, a few officials wearing full-body raincoats entered Sha Lake in the darkness and boarded the Jingdo ship at the Jiangnan Navy dock. The security was tight. Even the Navy generals responsible for receiving them did not clearly see the true faces of those people. Su Wenmao, who was responsible for all matters on the ship, looked at his colleagues boarding the ship in the rain and asked in surprise, "You've all come. What about, sir? The Chinian unit has to leave a few people behind, right?" An official said with a pained expression, "Sir said that we have to act more realistically. If we leave the people of the Chinian unit on the ship and we come back with our faces covered, then the Navy will believe that Sir is on the ship. If this news gets out, we'll be able to fool a few people." Su Wenmao was dumbfounded. "Your Excellency is having fun. Now that we have found traces in Shazhou, you still want to hide a—" He swallowed the dirty word, coughed twice and said, "That's fine. Let's set sail tomorrow and hurry to Jiangnan Road. 3rd of March. The official of the Chinian unit said solemnly, "The ship arrives in Suzhou on the 3rd of March. Sir gave us this date." Su Wenmao panicked. What ship can move so slowly? He stood up and waved his hand angrily. "No matter how we go on the river, I can't stay on Sha Lake anymore. I have to leave the port tomorrow." The official furrowed his brows and asked, "Sir, what's wrong?" A worried expression appeared on Su Wenmao's face and he said, "After entering the Jiangnan Navy camp, the commissioner and the third prince still refused to disembark. Which of the generals in the Navy did not have misgivings in their hearts? In the past 2 days, I don't know how many garrisons and commanders have been finding excuses to come up to the ship. Everyone knows that they are looking for opportunities to curry favor with the two nobles. But since Milord is not on the ship, how would I dare to let them come up?" The more he spoke, the angrier he became. Presumably, these 2 days of blocking people on the ship was about to get angry. "I can still block officials of this level, but I heard that the Admiral of the Navy will be rushing over tomorrow afternoon. This person is a first-level super official. Even if the commissioner is here, he will have to obediently salute. Even the third prince will not be able to do anything. How can I block this?" The official talking to him was also shocked. The status of the Admiral of the Navy could not be compared to those small fry officials. Once that person came, this lie would naturally be exposed. Even if the Admiral could not do anything to Commissioner Fan and the third prince, at most he would send a secret memorial to the Emperor to express his anger at being tricked. These people would have to be the punching bags. "Let's go. Let's leave early tomorrow morning." The Chinian unit left behind on the ship immediately reached a firm consensus. They began to have the Navy officers below prepare for departure. At the same time, they notified the Tiger Guard and 3 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau left on the ship. Milord said that he will send someone else to watch the meeting in Hangzhou. "You don't have to go," the official said as he gazed at Su Wenmao. The official looked at Su Wenmao and said, then asked curiously, "These 2 days? I reckon that the Navy must have sent many gifts." Su Wenmao pointed behind him with his lips. "It's all in the back. The person in charge of the army is really rich. No wonder he is a capable person who protects the water bandits." The official suddenly had an idea and said, "Weren't you worried earlier about how to drag it to the 3rd of March? I have a plan. How about?" He leaned close to Su Wenmao's ear and said something like this. "Good idea. The commissioner will not mind this kind of small matter. We are not allowed to take silver from court officials, but it is not wrong to take silver on his behalf." Amidst Su Wenmao's happiness, he thought of something and warned, "Right, look after the chest of silver in the back room. The commissioner has given a death order. Now no one is allowed to go near that chest." The official made a sound of acknowledgement, but he was muttering to himself. Although the chest contained tens of thousands of liang of silver, the commissioner's family was so rich. Was it worth keeping an eye on it like a family heirloom? Early the next morning, the fog on Sha Lake had just dispersed. The 80% new Jingdo ship slowly left the dock under the reluctant gazes of the Jiangnan Navy generals. It passed through the waterway and out of Sha Lake. Slowly and happily, it entered the waters of the Great River. Watching the big ship disappear at the mouth of the lake, the 3 naval ships that were in charge of protection also followed it out. The Jiangnan Navy officers on the shore all let out a collective sigh of relief. They had finally sent away the 2 untouchable gods of plagues. Thinking that the gifts they had given these days seemed to have gone to waste, they felt a bit of heartache. As for the matter of the prince and commissioner's ship encountering thieves in the naval defense area, of course, they needed a scapegoat. The gazes the generals looked toward Garrison Shen with were all a bit pitiful, but there was no one to take the lead on this matter. Everything had to wait for the admiral to return to camp in the afternoon. Actually, Su Wenmao had guessed wrong. The Jiangnan Navy generals waited until the 2nd day for the admiral to arrive. That leading figure of real power in the military, Jiangnan Navy Admiral Shi, was not in a rush to come. He was only anxious not to come too quickly. Admiral Shi was a lower first-level official and was an old friend of the old Qin family in Jingdo. Naturally, he would not be afraid of Fan Xian. However, this wily old soldier also knew that if he actually rushed to the water stronghold to meet Fan Xian, he would have to lower his status and say something because of the 3rd prince and that rumor. To flatter a child who had not even grown feathers on his mouth and had no feathers on his bird, how could he keep his old face? Thus, while Lao Shi sent someone to send a message saying that he was in a certain place dealing with official business and was on his way at top speed to pay his respects to the 3rd prince, he hugged his most beloved Fan and sat in the carriage, swaying back and forth towards the navy. He only hated that the journey was too short. In the end, Admiral Shi finally succeeded in making use of the time difference. By the time he arrived, the ship had already left like a yellow crane. On the other side, Su Wenmao sat on the big ship down the river in high spirits. He carried out Commissioner Fan's orders and accepted the suggestion of his subordinate official. Along the way he stopped at every province he saw and stopped at every port he saw. He didn't care that the docks were broken or that there were only a few thousand people living in a small county town by the river. In any case, he went and stopped. He stopped every day and stopped at one port. The ship's movements were strange, but it caused the entire Jiangnan roads officialdom to be in chaos. Everyone knew that Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council and the 3rd prince could be on the ship from Jingdo. Since it was so, wherever the ship stopped, the local officials had to go pay their respects. They also had to prepare a good banquet. They also had to have gifts on hand. At this juncture, who dared to be careless? If the upstream counties sent jade, the downstream counties could not compete. At the very least, they had to send a bag of cat's eyes, right? Our province is poor? Can we dig up a few ginseng? Our county has no money? We also have to bring a few strips of the famous pine needle and cypress smoked golden bacon. What if the 2 important figures on the ship are used to eating exotic delicacies and like our local food? What? The city doesn't produce anything? Quickly send workers to pull the ship for them. Over a month's time, although the officials along the river did not see the high and mighty nobles, they still used all their strength to curry favor with them. The big ship headed south and stopped at every county. Even if the place was small, they would not miss it. While the Jiangnan officials were happy about this rare opportunity to give gifts, they couldn't help but silently criticize Commissioner Fan and the 3rd prince. Their appetites were too good. They didn't even let go of those poor counties that didn't produce anything. Don't understand? No matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. In a manner in Suzhou, an advisor narrowed his eyes and said, "It looks like Sir Fan has truly inherited the style of the minister. He calculates accounts very carefully." Another advisor shook his head and sighed. Official voice. Official voice. Nowadays, these young nobles don't even bother with face. He then suddenly said with disdain, "Besides that Sir Fan Jr. is not Sir Fan Sr.'s. "Shut up. How dare you discuss such a thing? Without waiting for the Overwatch Council to skin you, I will hang you alive." The serious-looking official sitting in the middle yelled angrily. After he calmed his emotions, he raised his teacup and took a sip. "Don't talk behind people's backs. As long as they are willing to accept silver, it's fine. Jiangnan lacks everything but silver." The official closed his eyes and muttered to himself for a moment. With slight worry he said, "I'm afraid it's just a smokescreen that the commissioner is putting out. Who knows? Besides, who knows whether or not he is still on that ship? I heard from the gentleman heading south that Sir Fan's carriages are still heading toward Danzhou. Along the way he has collected a lot of silver." On the official road in the Central Plains, the group with the most people was under the lead of the fake Fan Xian, carrying a group of servants, guards and shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall toward Danzhou. On the river, Su Wenmao steered the big ship and joyfully carried out his gilded journey. He didn't know that he would be rained down on by Fan Xian in the future. A few pieces of news mixed together and confused the Jiangnan officials. They didn't know exactly where Commissioner Fan was. Even if some clever people guessed that Fan Xian might have other plans, they were unable to grasp any useful information. The people of the Second Bureau of the Overwatch Council were in Jiangnan covering the true whereabouts of Fan Xian and his group. In the early February weather, spring had not arrived and winter had not left. The chill domineeringly occupied the fields and roads on both sides of the river, rejecting any hint of spring's arrival. However, the Jiangnan area was close to the sea, so it was slightly warmer than other places. Thus there had been no snow these days. However, the mud marks that had been dug up on the official road had been blown by months of winter wind until they were incomparably dry and hard. It made the carriages moving on a jolt up and down. The people in the carriages were suffering unspeakably. Fan Xian couldn't take this hardship. He lifted the curtain and called for the carriages to stop. He jumped out of the carriage and rode his horse forward. Only then did he feel slightly more comfortable. He stretched and breathed in the slightly cold wind that blew against his face. Looking at the gutters on both sides of the official road, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He saw that the irrigation ditch had long run out of water. It was completely dry. If it was because the water had dried up during the winter, it would have been fine. The problem was that there were weeds as tall as a person growing in the ditch. Smoke slowly grew along the ditch. It looked barren and had no end in sight. He was a little puzzled. He thought to himself that it would only look like this if it had been working for many years. With a stomp of his feet, he stood up and looked down from above. He couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He discovered that most of the ditches around the official road were in the same state. The long grass in the ditches had long been frozen to death, but they were still standing stubbornly, piercing towards the sky. How could such ditches be used for irrigation? What about when it was time to plant in spring? When Fan Xian had returned from northern Qi, he had seen that the Qing kingdom's irrigation system was relatively complete. This Jiangnan area was the wealthiest in the world. How could it have no money to repair ditches? Did those lands not need to be planted? The official of the Fourth Bureau of the Overwatch Council who had followed him all the way from Jingdo saw the unhappiness on the commissioner's face. He patted his horse forward and explained, "It's just that this area is a bit uncultivated. Suzhou and Hangzhou are definitely not like this." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "Of course Jiangnan does not lack grain. The main thing here is that the land is thin, and too much labor has been taken by the palace treasury." He laughed bitterly and helplessly and didn't continue to speak. Everyone silently followed the weedy ditches. It had been a few days since they had left Shazhou. They had shaken slowly all the way, but they were nearing Hangzhou. The group of people were all a bit tired. Fan Xian didn't have the heart to play the game of inspecting the whole way and visiting incognito. The carriages behind follow up. The Fourth Bureau official's name was Wu Mai. Ever since Su Wenmao had stayed on the ship, the logistics and organization of this group had all been given to him. He could see that the commissioner was not in a good mood and couldn't say much. He could only order the people behind him to follow closely. There were many aces in these unassuming carriages. The problem was that the swordsmen of the Sixth Bureau and the Tiger Guards were not people who lived their lives. They were all old hands at solo assassinations. If they were asked to crawl into the long grass in the ditches and not eat or drink, it would be no problem for them to reach Hangzhou. However, if they were asked to go on a zero-fee tour, they appeared a bit listless. In particular, 70 li outside of Shazhou, the originally small group of people had bought 4 or 5 little girls at the foot of a mountain. They appeared to be dragging their feet and looked very much like a group of wealthy families on a tour. Speaking of that purchase, it was also a very shocking experience for Fan Xian. Presently, the Qing kingdom was in a golden age. He had never thought that in the Jiangnan area, there would be such a thing as having to sell one's own children because they were about to starve to death. Although those pitiful people were all exiles from Jiangbei, Fan Xian still felt a bit depressed. Their group was secretly heading to Hangzhou. It was not easy to bring these people. Furthermore, Fan Xian himself was a cold person. In the end, it was the third prince who couldn't bear it and spoke up. Only then did Cici happily take out a dozen liang of silver and buy the 5 little girls. The girls' parents thanked him profusely and left with tears streaming down their faces. Fan Xian silently accepted this reality. This group of people was too conspicuous. An elegant and noble young master, a poor and pedantic scholar, an arrogant child with his nostrils raised to the sky, a proper and generous noble serving girl, and a dozen powerful guards. Anyone who paid attention would be able to guess Fan Xian's identity. Now that there were a few more little girls, it could be considered a small disguise, Fan Xian persuaded himself. After a few more days, the official road was as smooth as a mirror. The winter trees on both sides of the road stood tall. The bustling scene suddenly appeared in front of this group of people. Looking at the busy road, the people's bright and fresh clothing, and the indistinct green city walls in the distance, only then did everyone realize that they had arrived in Hangzhou so easily. Fan Xian sat on the horse and waved the horsewhip. In high spirits he said, "Enter the city. Let's go find Aunt Song." Too tired? Rest. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 340. And he song? Everyone's heart jumped. They wondered if the commissioner also had a lover in Hangzhou. However, all the officials in the Overwatch Council knew that in matters between men and women, Fan Xian was one of the few officials in Jingdo who was proud of himself. He was young, yet he rarely went around to provoke others. With his reputation they must have thought wrongly. Of course they had thought wrongly. Fan Xian was just wondering if this Hangzhou was the same as that Hangzhou, with a woman surnamed Song selling fish soup. The West Lake here did not have the Su Causeway or the Bai Causeway, but he didn't know if there was a Jiangnan woman as pure and gentle as Shizi. After traveling the world, they had finally arrived at the Jiangnan that the literati could not forget. Fan Xian felt a little excitement in his heart. Squeezing his legs, he rode his horse in. Entering Hangzhou was very simple. Their group had long prepared the relevant travel permits and documents. They pretended to be the outpost of a large clan heading south from Wuzhou through Hangzhou. No one could see any problems with the stamp on the travel permits and documents. For the convenience of their own work, the Overwatch Council frequently used superb forgery techniques to hurt the moods of the various Yamen officials. This had become a well-practiced job. The group of people happily followed the straight road under the city gate into the city. At this time, Fan Xian had already gotten into the carriage. Lifting the curtain slightly, he looked at the scene inside Hangzhou. He saw the faces of the people on the streets were happy. There were many shops on both sides of the road. Not far in there was a restaurant. However, it was still early, so there was not much of an alluring aroma. Just by looking at the clothes of the people in Hangzhou and the streets, one could tell that Jiangnan was rich and populous. It was indeed not a lie. After traveling for a while, a long row of neat willow trees appeared in front of the group of carriages. The end of winter was especially cold, so there were no green leaves on the willow trees to welcome guests. They just hung down weakly like whips. However, they were neat, so the first impression they gave was very strong. Fan Xian's eyes were sharp. Through the layers of willow tree curtains, he saw the stretch of water blocked by the long row of willow trees. The light of the water was clear and soft, without a single ripple. In this late winter weather, the clear water gave off a sense of cleanliness. It was not a cold that kept people thousands of li away. It was just a sense of gentleness that made it a calm lake for 10 li. In the distance, the beautiful green mountains could be seen hidden in the mist. A few black-gray wooden buildings rose up along the lake, giving off a sense of wealth but not blinding. This water was West Lake. Today the West Lake was lively. Galloping by the West Lake, breaking willows and gifting green plums. These were 2 lines of a poem he had written in elementary school in his previous life. In that life he had a natural yearning for Hangzhou. He had always wondered how West Lake could be so beautiful, and how could it have so many famous people. However, there was a classmate in his club who came from Hangzhou. He once told him that West Lake was really not that good. At that time, Fan Xian, who was still called Fan Shin, was a bit unsure. He never had the opportunity to actually go to Hangzhou to get close to West Lake. One reason was that he later fell ill. The most important reason was that the housing prices in Hangzhou in that life were ridiculously expensive. Lu Shanglu by the West Lake was the most upscale restaurant in Hangzhou. Outside the building, green banners fluttered in the wind and green trees provided shade. There was a large square of green ground where books could be dried. Inside the building, the tables were made of green wood, and there were waiters dressed in green robes. It was a pity that it was winter. The green banners were frozen and the green tree trunks were yellow. On the square, the common people were fighting and the courtesans were still singing. However, it was not good to only wear a light muslin, so the taste was much weaker. Fan Xian sat at the table by the railing and looked out at the lake through the gap in the bamboo curtains. He was slightly disappointed. There was no Song Sa's fish soup, no dongpa pork, no beggar's chicken, not even water shield soup. Fortunately, the Longjing prawns were still there. Otherwise he would probably have turned around and left gloomily. Without the 6 and 6 towers and the broken bridge, was this West Lake still the West Lake in his heart? He picked up a small wine cup as thick as 3 fingers and drank it in one gulp with an unspeakable sense of loss. In reality he had been too harsh. The local food in Hangzhou was light and refreshing. It was very different from the food in Jingdou. It was also famous in the Qing kingdom. There were 3 tables in the compartment. Other than the 2 guards at the door, everyone else, regardless of master or servant, noble or lowly, was ordered to sit down by Fan Xian. They ate quietly. It was unclear whether the dripping sound was the sound of saliva or soup falling onto the table. Looking at the way these people ate, although there was hunger brought on by the long journey, it showed that the dishes of Lu Shanglu were indeed well made. The scene was a bit scary. A large group of people were eating silently and fiercely. The 2 guards at the door were swallowing. Only Fan Xian had the leisure to hold a wine cup and lean against the railing to admire the scenery. He pulled up the bamboo curtains outside the railing a little, and the light immediately brightened. The color of the winter lake reflected in his eyes. The wind blew into the building and dispersed the aroma of the dishes floating in the compartment. At the same time, an earth-shattering cheer came from the green stone plain outside the building. The sound of cheering followed the wind into the building and attracted the many diners who were leaning against the railing to cheer in unison. For a moment, there was a cauldron of voices and an indescribable liveliness. Only this compartment remained quiet. Fan Xian leaned against the railing to watch and drank another cup. A smile rose to his face. He was not very surprised. His subordinates were shaken by the countless cheers and raised their heads. They knew that the battle below had reached a critical point, but they did not rush to the railing to watch. On the contrary, they lowered their heads again and began to deal with the delicious food on the banquet table. Fan Xian glanced at his subordinates and felt it was a bit strange. Even if you are proud in your hearts and think that these martial artists on the Jianghu will not be able to withstand a few blows from you, we are all of the same profession. Surely you have some interest in studying it? In reality he didn't understand. For the Tiger Guards and the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau, no matter how lively the Jiangnan Martial Conference was, it was not as attractive as the delicacies on the table. The aces from the various large sects were skilled, but when it came to killing people it was not enough. After all, they were the professionals in killing. Cece and the girls who had just been bought were even more afraid of this kind of fighting and killing scene. They sat obediently at a table to the side and would not come over. Only the 3rd prince was the true driving force behind the scenes of coming to Hangzhou to watch the conference. He had used countless tricks to get Fan Xian to agree. How could he miss it? He held a plate of raw fried eel slices in one hand and a pair of chopsticks in the other to his mouth. He looked with great interest at the 2 people fighting on the green plain outside the building. He winked at them excitedly. Fan Xian glanced at him and furrowed his brows. In a quiet voice he said, "Your Highness, is it that delicious?" The 3rd prince was a bit angry that he had interrupted him from watching the show. He rolled his eyes at him and said, "The palace does not allow this." Fan Xian paused for a moment and immediately remembered. The food and drink in the royal palace had rules. Things like eels, which were rarely seen in the north, could not be served all year round. Furthermore, they were ugly, so it was difficult for them to enter the eyes of the royal chefs. He smiled self-mockingly and followed the 3rd prince's gaze downstairs. Unconsciously, he opened his mouth to explain to the child. The person using the sword is a disciple of Jiangnan's Longhu Mountain. Looking at his appearance, he is at least a 7th-level ace. Unfortunately, his wrist strength is not enough. I heard that his teacher was once a scholar. He did not have good foundational skills, and his bad habits have been passed on to his descendants. The person fighting him is relatively famous. Her name is Lu Cece. Don't look at me, she is just a woman. She is the disciple of Dongyi's Yun Jilan. She can be considered Sigu Jian's female disciple. She is from a famous family, so naturally she is not ordinary. I think that swordsman from Longhu Mountain will be waiting to have a few eyes slashed. Teacher. Yun Jilan? The third prince's chopsticks stopped at the edge of his mouth. Even a child like him had heard of this name. Yun Jilan was the first disciple of Dongyi's Sigu Jian. He had long entered the 9th level and was truly a master swordsman of his generation. Last year, when the Dongyi diplomatic group visited the Qing kingdom, the leader was this person. I heard he also came to Jiangnan. Other than to cheer up his favorite female disciple, Fan Xian said after thinking for a bit. Presumably, it has something to do with the Ming family. The relationship between Dongyi and the eldest princess had always been good, but their relationship with Fan Xian had always been bad. Although the two sides did not have much direct contact, they had indirectly crossed swords countless times. However, the only time they had crossed swords, it had already caused them to form a grudge that was difficult to resolve. He had killed 2 of Yun Jilan's female disciples on Yolan Street. Fortunately, Fei Jia had a lot of face. He had personally gone to Dongyi and sold off all the face he had gained from treating Sigu Jian's illness. Only then was he able to obtain a promise that Dongyi would not make trouble for Fan Xian. Otherwise, given the hot-blooded, impulsive and vengeful nature of the Dongyi people, Fan Xian would not have been able to live so comfortably these 2 years. It must be known that Sigu Jian was a madman who dared to assassinate even the Qing emperor. There were not many people on the plain. On one side of the lake was a large bamboo shed. In the shed sat a few virtuous and respected senior figures. In the middle sat an official of Jiangnan Road. Xia Qifei of the Jiangnan Water Bandits sat at the furthest side. He was young and did not have enough seniority in the Jiangnan martial world. Sitting on the platform was also an unremarkable official of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, but only Fan Xian recognized his identity. The Jiangnan martial meet had already been going on for half a day. The people competing on the plain had already changed a few times. Fists and swords came and went. It was very lively. Fortunately, after a few exchanges, no lives were lost. Under the gaze of the court officials, the Jianghu people were always a bit afraid. In the end, the martial meet became a successful, victorious, and united meeting. Some of the Jianghu people obtained fame, some obtained a rare opportunity to show their faces, and some obtained flashy but unsubstantial martial experience. Fan Xian watched this scene with cold eyes and easily thought of a novel from his previous life. The Jianghu was a corner of the country? The so-called Jianghu on the plain in front of him probably did not even count as a corner. It was just a flowery border of the country. However, there was a faint worry on his face. After watching for half a day, he found that although these Jianghu aces did not bring out their trump cards and did not fight with their lives on the line, there were indeed some truly powerful people. Take the swordsmen of Mount Longhu for example. In front of Dongyi, they were not at a disadvantage at all. In the end, it was probably because of Sigu Jian's name that they retreated half a step. The true aces did not appear. Those who did were already extraordinary. Behind these people, without exception, were the shadows of wealthy families or officials. If someone with ulterior motives gathered these powers together, even Fan Xian would feel a headache. No wonder the court had always been strict with this area. It looked like the emperor also knew that, toward the martial power of the people, he had to maintain a consistent power of intimidation. At the same time, he used the light of the court to draw them in. Fan Xian knew that in the end he had been too careless. Xia Qifei was right. There were truly heroes in the wilderness. However, under the pressure of the Qing emperor's valiant martial power for 20 years, there had been no opportunity to show it. Where is Yun Jilan? The third prince searched curiously in the crowd downstairs and did not notice Fan Xian's slight absent-mindedness. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "His identity is different. Of course, he doesn't have the patience to sit in the straw hut with those old men and court officials. Who knows where he's hiding right now?" It was said that in the royal palace the year before last, Fan Xian had been viciously pierced by Yun Jilan's sword-like gaze a few times. However, he was thick-skinned and black-hearted. He knew that Yun Jilan could not do anything to him, so he willingly accepted it. At this time, his gaze was scanning all around downstairs. He did not see any trace of that great swordsman. He felt slightly worried. He was not worried about himself. He was worried that the shadow would act on his own without his permission. Chen Pingping had once spoken of the grudge between the shadow and Sigu Jian. That kind of bone-deep hatred could not be suppressed by official duties, particularly since Yun Jilan had come to Jiangnan in disguise and did not go through the official route. If the shadow wanted to kill him, this was the best opportunity. However, aces were gathered on the banks of West Lake. There were many officials and elders. If a 9th-level battle broke out in front of everyone's eyes, it would be a feast for the eyes, but the effects would be too bad. It was clear that Yun Jilan had not come to Hangzhou for this stupid meeting. Of course he had come for him. Xinyang was sending goods in the direction of Dongyi. No matter what, Sigujian had to protect the Ming family. If he wanted to move against the Ming family, he would probably have to first find that great swordsman hiding in the shadows. At this time, the official in the bamboo shed downstairs stood up and walked to the stone plain. He raised his hands in a salute and warmly said, "Seeing all the heroes practicing martial arts today, I couldn't help but feel moved. The Qin court is indeed a land of great men. There are many heroes among the people. I hope everyone will continue to diligently practice martial arts in the future. One day you will be able to open up new territory for the Qin court on the battlefield. You will achieve great fame and bring honor to your ancestors." The official chuckled and said, "I am not afraid of being laughed at by all the heroes, but I am a scholar without the strength to truss a chicken. Watching the martial arts on the plain, I only feel envious. I wish I could learn a few moves from all of you so that in the future, I can mount a horse and kill bandits and win some face for the emperor." The Jianghu people on the plain all laughed at these words. They thought to themselves that this official's words were quite amusing amidst his politeness. Originally, the people on the plain were a bit angry that there was an extra pair of hawks and dogs from the imperial court watching over Jianghu matters for no reason. However, when they heard what the official said, some of them thought that this was indeed the case. Even if they learned good martial arts, they still had to sell it to the royal family. Although it was easy and free on the Jianghu, it was also easy to fall. It was not as good as serving in the military where one could gain both fame and fortune. The emperor had always placed great importance on martial arts. After so many years of peace, there would always be battles to fight in the future and military achievements to be earned. In the end, there were only a few people who thought this way. Most of the Jianghu people standing outside the plain and not involved in the matter snorted disdainfully at this court official. Someone said in a strange tone, "It is true that there are many heroes among the people, but not all of them are heroes of the Qin court. Weren't there a few swordsmen from Dongyi earlier? Are you also advising them to enlist as generals and fight their way back to Dongyi in the future?" Fan Xian listened from upstairs. He had originally admired this Jiangnan road official's clever way of speaking. Suddenly hearing these words, he couldn't help but laugh and quietly scold, "What a sharp tongue." To the side, the third prince said hatefully, "They are all a bunch of wicked people. Teacher is right. It is truly meaningless. We shouldn't have come to watch." However, the official on the plain calmly said, "The path of civil and martial arts has never been divided by national boundaries. The scholars of our court have also participated in the imperial examinations in the Qi kingdom. Now they have also become prime ministers in the court. Everyone knows that Sir Sigujian of Dongyi is a grandmaster. Naturally, his disciples are extraordinary. It is a fortunate event for the Qin court that these people have come to participate in this gathering. If the people of Dongyi are willing to serve the Qin court, the court will not refuse." He smiled self-mockingly and coughed a few times. "Of course, our court has been on good terms with Dongyi for generations. What that sir said earlier will not happen." The dark Jianghu person heard these words and laughed loudly. "There are many small kingdoms under heaven, but if we were to truly fight, the only ones worthy of being our opponent are Northern Qi and Dongyi. Sir said that fighting Dongyi will not happen. Does that mean fighting Northern Qi?" The crowd burst into an uproar. Some of the older people couldn't resist glaring at that person. They thought, not fighting with officials is the way of life. Why do you insist on saying it? Everyone looked at the person who spoke darkly and felt that he was unfamiliar. He didn't seem like a famous figure in the martial world of Jiangnan. Fan Xian, who was listening silently from upstairs, also felt it was strange, but he couldn't say what was strange. The Jiangnan road official on the plain was silent for a moment. He then suddenly opened his mouth and smiled slightly. "Sir's words are reasonable. However, other than the bustling central plains, the world is not peaceful. The barbarians in the west have recently begun to stir again. Has anyone heard of this?" He tossed out an unconfirmed rumor and first quieted the crowd. Only then did he smile and say, "The court and Northern Qi just exchanged letters last year. The marriage alliance is about to be completed, and the friendship between the two countries will be forever strong. How could it be as you say and start fighting again?" The aggressive Jianghu person was silent for a moment. He then said, "As long as the people of Qing think this way, then it is fine. Thank you for dispelling our doubts." After saying this, he retreated into the crowd behind him. These words revealed his identity. So, he was a person from Qi. There was a slight clamor among the crowd. However, the martial meeting had no restrictions. If Dong Yi could send people to participate, then Northern Qi could as well. No one could say anything. Upstairs, Fan Xian furrowed his brows and stood up. A clear light flashed in his eyes. He began to search the crowd below carefully. His gaze was not fixed on the Northern Qi person who was surrounded by the crowd and whispering. No one knew what he was looking for. The corner of the floor he was on was a bit to the side. There were winter trees covering a bit and bamboo curtains separating it, so the people downstairs did not notice him. They only treated him as a customer watching the spectacle. The expression of the official on the plane changed slightly. It seemed that he had not expected the person who had asked earlier to be a Northern Qi person. After pausing for a moment, he said with a glimmer of coldness and disdain, "It is true that the three countries are on good terms. However, sir who has come from the far north, I did not see you enter the stage earlier. Only now do I understand that our friends in Northern Qi all like the way of scriptures. Their confidence in this area is indeed lacking." After these words were said, the Qing people and Dongyi people on the plain all laughed loudly. Although Northern Qi, like the Qing kingdom, had not been founded for long, they had inherited the Northern Wei kingdom. The air of pedantry was too heavy. The people of Northern Qi mostly walked the gentle path. In comparison, their style of martial arts was not flourishing. In the hearts of the people of Jianghu, they had a weak impression of Northern Qi. Although Northern Qi also had a great grandmaster, Ku He, he was obsessed with the practice of Tianyi Dao and rarely walked the world. They also had a valiant general, Shang Shanhu, but he had been placed in the cold lands of the extreme north by the Northern Qi court. Now that he had been summoned back to the capital, he was placed under house arrest in his manor and was not given an important position. In the hearts of the people of Jianghu, they did indeed look down on Northern Qi people. It must be said that Dongyi was the place with the most ninth-level aces in the world. When it came to martial arts, they had a natural confidence. The Qin kingdom revered martial arts and had as many famous and fierce generals as there were clouds in the sky. The Qin and Yi families had countless generals. Among the martial aces, there were 2 great grandmasters and many ninth-level aces. Putting aside General Yan Xiaoyi who could shoot an arrow through the clouds, the recently risen Sir Fan Jr. was an example of a martial genius. In these 2 years they had learned that a girl had appeared in the north. However, she was a woman. The people of Jianghu valued men more than women than common people. They looked down on Northern Qi people more and more. Thus, after the official said these words, regardless of whether it was the Qing boxing master or the Dongyi swordsman, they all laughed loudly. The Northern Qi man's face darkened and revealed a glimmer of anger. Upstairs, Fan Xian revealed a strange smile that was difficult to understand. He liked that the Jiangnan road official did not suppress his anger. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked quickly downstairs as if he was looking for something. Then he gently slapped the railing. His hand gripped the edge of the green wooden railing tightly with some force. It looked like there was a glimmer of excitement in his heart. The third prince looked at him with confusion. Fan Xian's gaze was cast toward the large tree by the side of the road in the distance on the plain. Under the tree was a normal woman holding a basket and selling flowers. It was cold outside. Who knew where the flowers in her basket came from? The woman's back had been facing this way the entire time. She also had a flowery scarf tied around her head, so it was impossible to see her face. Just as the official on the plain began to insult Northern Qi, she turned around and glanced at him lightly. With this turn, her face fell into Fan Xian's eyes. If it wasn't Hai Tang, who else could it be? Hai Tang had already arrived in Jiangnan. Fan Xian's mind began to spin quickly. That girl clearly already knew that he was the illegitimate child of the Qing emperor. Why did she still follow the letter and come down to Jiangnan to find him? Did she still dare to give the heart of Tianyi Dao to him under these circumstances and complete Northern Qi's plan to raise a tiger? However, at this juncture, there were too many things that Fan Xian needed to make a decision in a flash. He took a deep breath, calmed his emotions and continued to search for Yun Jilan's figure downstairs. This was a sudden opportunity. It required a great deal of courage to make the decision to act. Although Fan Xian's personality was steady, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He didn't know if the shadow would be able to grasp this opportunity. At this moment he felt it was a pity that the shadow's personality was too unreasonable. Otherwise, if he had the people of the 6th Bureau cooperate with him, perhaps the chance of success in today's impromptu plan would have been greater. The girl selling flowers under the large tree had already slowly walked toward the plane. A light and fresh aura spread out from her body. Immediately, the Jianghu aces there sensed something strange. Everyone unconsciously made a path for the girl selling flowers. It was as if they didn't dare block in front of her. After this normal-looking girl walked past, only then did the heroes feel it was strange. Why did they make way for her? In just a moment, Haitang had already walked onto the large plane with a calm expression and stood naturally in front of the official. In a quiet voice she said, "Sir, I am a northern Qi person. I am crude and do not know scriptures, but I do have some confidence in fighting." The Jiangnan Road official narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the unremarkable girl in front of him. For a moment he didn't say anything. It was as if he had been intimidated by her. At this moment the cold wind from West Lake blew over. It didn't move the thick cotton jacket on Haitang's body, but it blew the messy hair at her temples in front of her face. It looked slightly funny. Today Hangzhou did not have a fairy appear out of nowhere. Instead, there was a village girl who had stood on the stage because her hometown had been humiliated. The northern Qi person, who had been indignant but silently enduring, saw her appear and pretended to be hesitant. A moment later, his eyes seemed to light up and he was overjoyed. He passed through the crowd and knelt below the plane. "Miss Haitang, why have you come?" The Jianghu people surrounding the building were all shocked. When they looked at the normal-looking girl again, their gazes became wary and fearful. Haitang? Northern Qi's Haitang. Grandmaster Ku He's last disciple, a 9th-level ace who was unmatched in the north, a legendary Tianmai. It was impossible for a great grandmaster to appear out of nowhere by West Lake. Who could be a match for her? While Haitang was posing and stealing the limelight, Fan Xian didn't have the extra energy to look at her. From the beginning he didn't look at her. He only furrowed his brows and carefully watched the movements of everyone below. A moment later he finally noticed a place. Beside the lake, under the embankment in a small boat, a fisherman wearing a straw hat and holding a fishing rod in his hand. Fan Xian's palms rested on the railing and his eyes stared unblinkingly at the fisherman. He found that the moment Haitang appeared, the fishing rod in the fisherman's hand gently lowered. There was no fish on the fishing line. The fisherman thought highly of Haitang's cultivation and wanted to hide himself deeper, so he made this subconscious reaction. This small change fell into Fan Xian's eyes. He extended his hand and took the blue and white porcelain plate from the third prince's hand. The third prince said with great surprise, "I haven't." Before he finished speaking, Fan Xian had already thrown the blue and white porcelain plate down the stairs with force. With a crisp clang, the porcelain plate shattered into countless pieces, clinking endlessly. Because of Haitang's appearance, the outside of the building was completely silent, so the sound was particularly clear. Some people raised their heads to look upstairs and wondered which inexperienced person had thrown the plate down the stairs after hearing the northern Qi sage girl's name. These people did not see Fan Xian's appearance because of the large trees and bamboo curtains. Some people continued to watch the scene nervously, not knowing what Haitang would do next. Only the fishermen on the lake and Fan Xian upstairs did not have any obstructions in their line of sight. The fisherman could clearly hear that the plate had been thrown forcefully and not smashed down, so he was slightly surprised and turned his head to take a glance. It was only one glance, but he could not pull it back because Fan Xian's gaze was coldly staring back at him, staring fixedly at him. Yun Jilan, who was disguised as a fisherman, looked at the calm young man upstairs. It was as if a fire was burning in his heart. "Fan Xian, you're also here." Yun Jilan slowly pulled back his fishing rod, but his gaze was still like a pair of dazzling swords as it shot up the stairs. Separated by dozens of feet, it was as if the two people upstairs and on the boat had forgotten everyone inside and outside the building. They had forgotten that Haitang was in a rage and only stared at each other. For a long time, the two people's gazes did not separate. There was no probing in their gazes, only a naked coldness. Because of their past hatred and the aftermath of the Jiangnan Ming family matter, it was impossible for the two of them to appreciate each other. Yun Jilan pulled back half of his fishing rod. Very strangely, a dagger with no light appeared at the edge of the fishing rope beside the boat. It seemed to be silently rising up as he reeled in the line. Finally, the soul-reaping dagger gradually floated up to the surface of the water. Most of Yun Jilan's attention was on Fan Xian in the building and a small portion was on Haitang in the plane. Although he was Sigu Jian's first disciple, he knew that Haitang and Fan Xian were both the most unfathomable figures of the younger generation. Furthermore, it was rumored that these two were particularly compatible. At this moment, they had suddenly appeared at the same time in Hangzhou and beside this little boat. What exactly did they want to do? A streak of black light flashed past. The fisherman on the boat gave a muffled grunt. A terrifying arrow of blood shot into the sky from his body. It was as if the black canopy on the little boat was being pulled by countless forces at the same time. In an instant, it shattered into countless pieces and shot out. With a splash, a figure dressed entirely in black broke through the water of West Lake and pierced through the air in the direction Yunjilan had faintly escaped. After 2 sounds of breaking through the air, there was no trace of anyone by the lakeside. All that was left was a lake full of broken pieces of the black canopy, rising and falling with the waves. Among the broken pieces, a bamboo hat commonly seen in Jiangnan floated unsteadily. It seemed to be expressing its protest toward Fan Xian in the building. Regardless of whether you are for or against, please don't argue too intensely. Isn't it good to read quietly? Even if there are differences of opinion, please discuss it more gently. In reality, I am still quite calm. After all, I have thick skin. However, I don't even dare to add highlights recently, afraid that it will add fuel to the fire. Here I still want to explain a bit more. How the book is written is all my personal opinion, and I will stick to it in the future. It is not influenced by too many external factors. If there is any description that conflicts with the reader's point of view, not just the recent matter, of course I may not be correct, but I will still stick to it. I hope everyone can understand and understand. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 341. West Lake was not large. The lake embankment was only a few li long. Looking out from the top floor, the lake water still had a vast and mighty power. Fan Xian was standing on the top floor. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the surface of the lake through the cover of the bamboo curtain. He saw 2 shadows flitting quickly across the surface of the lake near the right embankment. Occasionally they would tap on the surface of the lake, sending up splashes of water. Then they would step on the bow of the boat beside the embankment and sweep past. Their speed was astonishing. They were like 2 bolts of lightning following one another. Occasionally they would follow behind and in front of the lake. Between the crisscrossing sword chi, the 2 of them were like rocks flying in the air. Their postures were graceful and carried a sense of killing that made one shiver. Blood suddenly appeared. The 2 of them separated again and slid forward like birds. It appeared beautiful, but it was exceptionally shocking. Fan Xian stood high and could see far. In just a moment, the 2 aces had disappeared into the winter willow woods on the other side of the lake. Looking in the direction they were going, it seemed they were going toward those black and noble courtyards. He furrowed his brows. Yunjilan was heavily injured and still able to hold out for so long. Dong Yi's reputation as a master swordsman was indeed not undeserved. In the occasional eagle-like scene that appeared on the surface of the lake, the shadow did not seem to be using the method he was most familiar with. Instead, he was using Dong Yi's Sigu sword method. Thus, the 2 aces' sword moves were very similar. In a flash, although only a few fragmented scenes appeared on the surface of the lake, it was still dazzling and chilling. Logically speaking, the shadow was following him like a maggot attached to a bone. The injured Yunjilan seemed to have only one path to death. But why did he charge straight toward the other side of the lake? Was there Dong Yi's helper there? Fan Xian felt more and more that there was something strange about the gorgeous and noble wooden buildings on the other side of West Lake. With a swish, he pulled down the bamboo curtain blocking the wind and left the side of the railing. Glancing at the 3rd prince, who was looking at him stupidly, he calmly said, "What are you looking at?" "Keep eating." After saying this, he sat down at the table. Picking up his chopsticks, he began to search through the leftovers for the dwindling shrimp. Everyone in the room stared at him in astonishment. The 3rd prince was also gloomily guessing what had happened outside. Who was killing who? The people on the plain had all rushed to the side of the lake and cried out in surprise. Clearly, something big had happened. Shi Chanli could not help but ask quietly, "Sir? What happened?" Fan Xian didn't think much and replied straightforwardly, "I don't know who stabbed the fisherman by the lake. Right now they're chasing him to the other side of the lake." The room was silent. What kind of attack on a fisherman could shock the experienced and knowledgeable Jianghu heroes downstairs so much? No one believed his words, but they had no way to refute him. Beside the West Lake on the bluestone plain, Haitang stood next to the official. She gazed at the two supreme experts who had already disappeared from the lake. Her expression was calm. No one knew what she was thinking. Meanwhile, the people of the Jiangnan Wulin had already rushed to the lakeside. Looking at the ripples on the surface of the lake, they gasped in surprise. Although the crowd did not see the first scene, they could still clearly see the scene of the small boat breaking apart and the two experts soaring across the lake like giant birds. With just a glance, everyone knew that the two people fighting had unfathomable strength. They were definitely not ordinary people, and it sounded like they had already entered the mysterious ninth stage. After the crowd's shock, they began to guess the identity of the two people. After discussing for a long time, there was still no conclusion. Even though some of the more intelligent people could see that the swordplay on the lake had the style of Sigu, they would not point it out. Those proud old men thought to themselves, "Doesn't Dongi always like to brag about how many aces you have? I'll let you fight among yourselves." However, the female disciples from Dongi by the lake had serious expressions. They had not thought that in the prosperous Hangzhou of the Qing kingdom, there would be someone who dared, and could, harm their teacher. With LVCC in the lead, these female swordsmen hurriedly bowed to the host and then silently left the stone plain beside the building. They anxiously ran along the lake bank in that direction. The Jiangnan Wulin people were filled with shock, but they were also somewhat satisfied. At the end of today's lackluster martial conference, they were able to see the northern Qi Saint girl Haitang appear. Furthermore, two supreme swordsmen had suddenly appeared by the lakeside to fight. This ticket price was worth it. The Jianghu people of the Qin kingdom used the assassination as an opportunity to cleverly forget about Haitang's appearance on the stage. Everyone knew that at this time no one was a match for that girl. If they didn't want the Qing people to lose face, then they had to quickly take the opportunity to bluff their way through. Thus, the heroes of the Jianghu chose to eat in the closest building. They prepared to use wine as an introduction and then discussed the shocking scene they had seen earlier. It was rare to see the leaders of the various gangs and sections. Under the impartial notarization of the government, they could also discuss the distribution of benefits in the underworld. The Jiangnan road official and a few virtuous and respected seniors very naturally greeted Haitang, no longer mentioning what had happened earlier, and very courteously invited Miss Haitang to enter the building to rest for a while. As they were about to enter the building, a young nobleman with a clear face and warm and spirited eyes came out to welcome them. He bowed to Haitang and warmly said, "Miss Haitang has come from afar. It is my honor to have this opportunity to get close to you." "Who is this gentleman?" Haitang had never been an icy fairy. She asked casually and politely. Her mind was actually still on the two aces who had floated away to kill. "My surname is Ming. I am the owner of this building." At the very back of the group was Xia Qifei of the Jiangnan Water Bandits. He raised his eyes to glance at the gentleman named Ming. His expression was calm and unchanging, but he laughed coldly in his heart. His nephew, whom he hadn't seen for many years, was becoming more and more successful. He even knew how to flatter the northern Qi people. Upstairs building was also the property of the Ming family. It had always been managed by a shopkeeper. However, there was a major event at the side of the building today, so the son of the current head of the Ming family, Ming Qingda Ming Launcher, had personally come here. As a wealthy family in Jiangnan, they understood that not only did they have to have a good relationship with the government, but they also had to purposely curry favor with important figures from other countries. That was why he rushed out of the building to receive Haitang. At the same time, he did not forget to greet the Jiangnan road official beside her. He was a smooth and slick character and did not seem like a wastrel. The gazes of the customers in the building were all gathered at the door. They all wanted to see what the legendary Haitang girl looked like. Haitang herself was a famous person. Secondly, the Qing people had all heard the gossip and knew that this girl had some unclear connection with their Sir Fan Jr. The Qing people all saw Fan Xian as their pride and saw him as the most outstanding figure in the court. Looking at Haitang again now, they couldn't help but have a critical and judgmental gaze as if they were looking at a bride about to marry. When everyone saw her clearly, they couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. This girl was not very pretty. It seemed that she was not a good match for Sir Fan Jr. Fan Xian heard the voices outside the building gradually die down, but the inside of the building gradually become noisy. He knew that the uncivilized heroes were about to enter the building. He signaled with his eyes for a tiger guard to stand next to a compartment, in case there were some ignorant Jianghu people who wanted to imitate the bullies in the stories and forcefully take a spot, causing a conflict. Fan Xian did not have the time to play these games in the capital. Gauda glanced at him. After receiving Fan Xian's nod, He waved his hand for the tiger guard to return. He left the room himself and took the place of the two guards who had not eaten yet. Everyone had pretty much finished eating. Everyone, including the third prince, stared at Fan Xian with a questioning gaze. Cece was no exception. Her gaze was filled with curiosity. "What are you looking at?" Fan Xian furrowed his brows. "The matter on the lake really has nothing to do with me." Shi Chanli laughed quietly in his heart. He thought that sometimes his teacher was smart, but sometimes his reaction was too slow. Everyone was too embarrassed to ask the question in their hearts. It was the third prince who didn't care about Fan Xian's temper. He chuckled and said, "It's not about that." "Then what is it about?" The voices outside grew louder and louder. It looked like the Jianghu people downstairs couldn't sit anymore and were all heading upstairs. The third prince pointed outside the door and said, "That Haitang girl is here. Teacher, aren't you going to invite her in to sit?" Everyone in the room turned their expectant gazes to Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian's face darkened and he scolded, "What kind of brains are you all born with? It's already good enough that I brought you all to Hangzhou to watch the excitement, and you still want me to personally act for you to see?" Shi Chanli winked and said, "Teacher, Haitang is not an outsider. Eating together is a common thing." Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "At this time, everyone is watching. If we invite her in, everyone will know who we are." The third prince used his clear and tender voice to refute, "I don't understand why we have to be incognito. Can't we reveal our identities and go sightseeing? The Jiangnan people wouldn't dare to do anything to us." Fan Xian furrowed his brows with a headache and said, "It's not that I'm afraid of anything. It's just that it's rare to have a relaxing trip out of the capital. Do you have to be surrounded by a dozen white-bearded officials? Your Highness, you don't like these kinds of days either, do you?" The third prince paused. Only now did he realize that Commissioner Fan's incognito visit was not with the intention of secretly investigating the evidence of his family's crimes. It was purely because his interest in traveling had flared up. Thinking that he had overestimated Fan Xian's professional ethics, the third prince couldn't help blushing slightly. He silently criticized Fan Xian for being somewhat suspicious. He laughed mockingly and said, "So what if they know? If we don't go to the yamen ourselves, presumably no one will dare to follow us. Isn't that clearly asking for humiliation?" Fan Xian was too lazy to pay attention to him. He thought to himself that the scene of people in officialdom sucking up was not something a child like you could understand. The two brothers were silently looking down on each other when they heard the noise outside the side room grow louder. It seemed that someone wanted to enter the room Fan Xian and them were sitting in. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and said with great astonishment, "Don't say that. Did we really run into such a common thing?" Gao stood guard outside the room with a dark expression. He looked at the angry Jianghu people in front of him and listened to the filthy words coming out of their mouths. His hand gripped the hilt of his long knife, but he still did not pull it out. Haitang was looking at him with great interest. Of course, there were already 3 Jianghu heroes lying in front of him. The heroes were holding their heads and holding their stomachs, crying out wretchedly and pretending to be wronged. Indeed, as Fan Xian had expected, after those arrogant Jianghu people went upstairs, they immediately saw the room Fan Xian and them were sitting in. This room was one of the 2 best spots on the upper floor. The other one had been left behind by the young master of the Ming family to prepare for the host of the martial assembly. Those Jianghu people did not dare fight for territory with the officials and Haitang, but they began to drool when they saw this room and clamored for the people inside to quickly make room. At this time, the young master of the Ming family had not yet come upstairs. How could the shopkeepers and workers dare to offend these knife-wielding Jianghu people? They could only stand to the side and say nice things. What kind of person was Gao? He was one of the leaders of the emperor's personal tiger guards. If he had been on the Jianghu these years, he would probably have long established his own sect. Faced with such unreasonable requests, the commissioner snorted disdainfully at them and did not bother with them at all. He was just waiting for the Jianghu people to move forward. Without unsheathing his long knife, he would strike them. Then there would be a few more wretched cries on the ground. The building was full of people who were attending the martial assembly. They were used to being unreasonable on the Jianghu. Today they suddenly saw someone even more unreasonable than them. Sharing a common hatred for their enemy, they uniformly surrounded him and looked at Gao with unkind gazes. This matter was Fan Xian's fault. After half a year of being together day and night, other than Gaoda's killing skills, he had also been infected with too much of Fan Xian's ruthlessness. Being among the common people, Gao did not want to be too heavy-handed, so he used Fan Xian's little tricks. He finished the battle quickly, but the ruthlessness made the people watching around feel very uncomfortable. The swordsman from Longhu Mountain furrowed his brows and said, "Sir, although it was these friends who spoke rudely first, and their requests were indeed a bit excessive, you suddenly attacking them with such underhanded methods is a bit too much." Gao Da's face darkened. He couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. The swordsman from Longhu Mountain saw him attack and knew that his opponent's power was probably even higher than his teacher, who was in seclusion on the mountain. Thus he respectfully called him sir, and did not treat him as a normal guard. Seeing Gao Da's still expressionless face, although the swordsman was a bit wary of the identity of the person in the room, he still gradually became angry. It was at this moment that Hai Tang came up to the top floor under the escort of the crowd. Looking at Gao Da facing off against the crowd, a strange light flashed through her eyes. She naturally walked into the middle of the crowd. At this moment, everyone in the building was guessing Gao Da's identity in fear. No one had ever seen such an ace on the Jianghu who used a knife, so they couldn't help feeling confused. However, Hai Tang had seen Gao Da many times in Shangjing in northern Qi and had long recognized him at a glance. Ming Xiaodong saw that the scene was a mess and quickly came up to smooth things over. He also quickly ordered people to vacate the other rooms and arranged for servants to help the heroes on the chopping block to rest. The Ming family had great wealth and power in Jiangnan. Any hero would have to give Ming Xiaodong face. Furthermore, they could see that Gao Da's cultivation was truly astonishing. The person in the room was probably not someone they could provoke. The crowd gradually dispersed, but their mouths continued to mumble incessantly. After arranging everything, Ming Xiaodong said a few apologetic words to Gao Da. He then warmly and politely invited Hai Tang, the official, and the others to another private room that had been prepared earlier. Unexpectedly, Hai Tang held a flower basket in one hand and looked at Gao Da with a not quite there smile in her eyes. She didn't even turn around. She only said in a quiet voice, "Thank you, Master Ming, for your good intentions. However, Hai Tang has met an old friend today. I have to go and disturb him." Everyone was startled. The gaze they looked at Gao Da with was a bit strange. They thought to themselves that since this guard's skill was so terrifying, the identity of the person inside must be extraordinary. Furthermore, was he Hai Tang's old friend? They were all smart people. The Jiangnan Road official coughed and said something to Hai Tang before quickly pulling everyone away. What a joke. What if it was really that young master inside? That person was now playing a mysterious game in Jiangnan. He was not an official with a high level of flattery like the prefectural magistrate. If he rashly exposed him, would he have any good days in the officialdom in the future? Everyone cast a fawning smile at Gao Da and quickly left like the wind. Only Ming Xiaodong revealed a stunned expression and shook his head with a pained smile. The door to the side room was pushed open with a creak. Hai Tang carried the flower basket and walked in. The light suddenly brightened. Fan Xian held a wine cup and looked at the girl who had entered without an invitation. A moment later he choked out two words, "You're here?" Hai Tang nodded and smiled slightly at the curious people in the room with their mouths wide open. Very naturally she walked to his side and sat down. She replied, "I'm here." Fan Xian put down the wine cup and said bitterly, "I had Gao to go out specifically because I was afraid you would come in and reveal my whereabouts. Did you not see the look he gave you?" Gao Da stood at the door and looked innocently at the scenery of the lake and mountains outside. Hai Tang took off the floral scarf on her head and said without good humor, "A proper 8th level ace guarding the door. Only an idiot wouldn't guess who was sitting inside." Fan Xian laughed frivolously and said, "Jiangnan is full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. No one knows Gao Da. My boat is still moving on the river. Who would guess I've already arrived in Hangzhou?" Hai Tang looked into his eyes. A moment later she said helplessly, "Such stupid confidence, I really don't know where you got it from. Could it be that this is the spiritual victory method you mentioned in the past?" Fan Xian retorted, "But as long as you don't enter this room they can only guess. How can they prove who I am?" Hai Tang said with slight annoyance, "I just don't like your sneaky manner. You can clearly do things openly, yet you have to take a few turns and smear some dark colors. It's as if you don't do this, it won't be enough to prove you're a schemer." Fan Xian said angrily, "I've always been a schemer. How can you be any better than me? Wasn't that northern Qi man downstairs arranged by you to find an opportunity to challenge all the heroes in Jiangnan so you could establish your might in one battle and dazzle everyone? Fortunately, you didn't get what you wanted today. Otherwise, the face of the Qin kingdom would have been shaved clean by you." Hai Tang smiled mockingly and said, "If you don't feel good in your heart, you should have jumped down to fight me just now. I don't have that kind of spare time. Gao is standing guard at the door because Ming Xiaodong is not an idiot. He will certainly find someone to test who is sitting in the room. I dare to bet my head that those Jianghu men who came to cause trouble were all arranged by Ming Xiaodong. I had Gao go out because I wanted him to intimidate the so-called Jianghu people and have the Ming family stop using these lowly probing methods. You, on the other hand, messed up all the arrangements the moment you appeared, making it so that I couldn't even use the opportunity to fly off the handle. Fan Xian angrily said, "This is the Qin kingdom. You have to listen to me." Haitang's eyes gazed at the roof and said, "When have I ever listened to your arrangements?" From the moment Haitang entered the room, the two of them began to argue tit for tat. They did not give an inch. It was clearly Fan Xian who did things indiscriminately, yet he spoke with conviction. It was clearly Haitang who purposely exposed his past, yet she said she didn't like his way of doing things. The speed at which the two of them spoke became faster and faster, but their voices were still kept very low, like a series of muffled firecrackers. The expressions of everyone in the room became strange, but they kept their mouths tightly shut, not daring to make any sound. Looking at the exciting scene in front of them, they thought to themselves that the rumors on the Jianghu were indeed true. Given Commissioner Fan's crystal heart, sharp tongue, power and strength, there were not many people who dared to speak to him like this. Only this girl from the north could suppress Commissioner Fan in terms of aura. If there were no problems between the two of them, even if a blind man was beaten to death, he would not believe it. The third prince was closest to the two of them arguing. His little face alternated between looking at Fan Xian and Haitang like he was sitting in the first row watching a tennis match. His expression was very interesting. He thought to himself that this kind of scene was rarely seen. He had to firmly remember it so that when he returned to the capital, he could tell Sister Chen and father. In the end, it was still Shi Chanli who felt a bit sorry for his teacher and carefully interjected, "Sir, Lady Haitang, let's think about how to leave now. In a bit, I'm afraid the Hangzhou Zhizhou, the Hangzhou General, the Jiangnan weaving factory, and those people will all rush over to greet you. I've already seen quite a few people come out of the building." Fan Xian slapped his thigh and glared hatefully at Haitang. "Hurry up and leave. Otherwise, what kind of vacation is there?" Haitang sat as calm as a mountain and said straightforwardly, "I'm hungry." The third prince joined in the fun and said, "Then hurry and call the waiter to bring some more food." Fan Xian glared at him. Haitang chuckled and said, "Thank you, third prince." Not long after noon, a manor on the other side of West Lake became lively. Of course, the liveliness was limited to the courtyard. Outside, it looked as cold and cheerless as usual. This manor was beautifully decorated but not greasy. Leaning against the mountains and facing the lake, it was truly a wonderful place. Just this garden was probably worth hundreds of thousands of liang of silver. The owner of the manor was surnamed Peng. No one knew his identity. In the past, it was only during the summer that some people would come to spend the summer heat. Today it was Fan Xian and his group that had come to this manor. This manor was bought by the previous Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, using the name of a distant relative of his student, Sir Peng. Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan and come to Hangzhou. Of course, he was staying in his father-in-law's property. The housekeeper in the garden had long received the news and had already arranged everything. At this moment, Fan Xian was sitting cross-legged on the grand wooden armchair, tasting Longjing tea and enjoying the life of a rich man in Hangzhou. He squinted at Haitang, who was quietly saying something to the third prince, and couldn't help feeling a bit angry. Of course, this group of people did not continue to stay in the building above. Haitang also did not order a few more famous dishes. In order to avoid the Hangzhou officials who were hurrying over, Fan Xian pulled his subordinates and fled. The group of carriages pretended to enter the city. Along the way, they used all of the people of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council's Inspection Division stationed in Hangzhou. They even used the 2 cloth stores the 6th Bureau had prepared for assassins. Only then did this group of people disappear once again into the sea of people in the city. Silently, they circled back and entered the manor beside West Lake. Fan Xian's heart ached for the subordinates in the council. Haitang glanced at him and mumbled, "Who exactly are you hiding from?" Fan Xian sighed and said, "I'm hiding from trouble." In reality, what happened today was because of Fan Xian's own stupidity. If he really didn't want to reveal his whereabouts, he couldn't have gone to Luelu. If he had gone to Luelu, then when someone stole his seat, he would have had to swallow his anger and be a grandson. The problem was that Fan Xian's personality was lively and he didn't like being a grandson. How could he always hide his true identity when walking on the Jianghu? After a while, the third prince went to the garden to tease the newly bought servant girl. A servant woman from the manor brought up a plate of hot cakes. Haitang ate them with relish. Looking at her appearance, she had indeed been terrifyingly hungry all the way south. Fan Xian glanced at her and furrowed his brows. Be more ladylike. Haitang burst into laughter. She hadn't seen this bastard for half a year. Why did they start arguing as soon as they saw each other? That feeling was rather amusing. After she finished eating the cakes, Fan Xian used his eyes to indicate for her to follow him to the back garden. Although he had never been to this manor before, the architectural design was always similar. Very easily he found a quiet study. In the study the two of them sat down. Fan Xian gazed at the girl and said seriously, You should know about that rumor by now. Haitang nodded. Suddenly she furrowed her brows and said, Let's not talk about that for now. Who were the two people on West Lake today? Did you recognize them? I've seen that fisherman before. Fan Xian seemed to be recalling. It should be Yun Jilan. Last year. Oh no, it should be the year before last. I saw him once in the palace. At that time he was the leader of the Dongi diplomatic group. Haitang furrowed her brows and was silent for a long time. She then asked, To be able to hurt Yun Jilan? Who exactly was that assassin? Why have I never heard of such a person? Fan Xian smiled coldly. A secret ambush. Even a child could kill a great grandmaster. Haitang shook her head. You probably haven't studied Dongi sword techniques. That assassin used the purest Sigu sword intent. Fan Xian gently smoothed the fine hair at the corner of his forehead. Casually he said, Dongi has many aces. If they kill each other it will only be good for our plan. There is no harm. Haitang was still thinking back to the assassin who had leaped out of the lake. She felt that although the black-clothed man used a pure sword technique, there was an indescribable strangeness to it. It was as if she had seen it somewhere before. The reason she had this impression was because of the battle between her and Fan Xian on the meadow. The moves he used were similar to the shadow assassins. They both carried the shamelessness of the Overwatch Council. However, she would never have thought of it here. Not one of your people? She looked at Fan Xian with some suspicion. Fan Xian laughed self-mockingly. You can see it too. The assassin's ability is probably about the same as yours. How could I order around an exceptional 9th level ace? Haitang nodded and accepted this explanation. She then asked, On your way south you actually didn't encounter any assassins. This really surprised me. Logically speaking, Xinjiang should have. Fan Xian raised his hand and stopped her question. Calmly he said, A peaceful and grand event. This kind of thing is too sensational. Furthermore, Xinjiang does not have the ability to kill me. Haitang furrowed her brows. Your injury has healed? Fan Xian's expression did not change. He smiled slightly and said, It's healed a long time ago. Otherwise, how would I dare to come down to Jiangnan? You know I've always been most afraid of death. Haitang smiled slightly. Only then did she relax. The matter we agreed on in the letter, is it now or at night? Fan Xian was a lewd person in his bones. Immediately he heard a hint of lust in these words. He quickly coughed and said, At night. Since it is a gift from the imperial advisor, I have to be more formal. Even if I don't light incense you have to let me take a bath, right? But my question earlier. His question was, he clearly knew he was the illegitimate child of the Qing emperor. Why did the great Grandmaster Ku he still dare to give him the martial method of Tianyi Dao? Without waiting for him to finish, Haitang had already risen with a smile and left her seat. We'll talk about it at night. I want to go see the scenery of West Lake. I've read about it countless times in books. I haven't seen it in detail today. Fan Xian watched as she casually picked up the flower basket on the table and asked curiously, Duo, where did you get these flowers at this time of year? I bought silk flowers in Wuzhou. They're fake. They're all fake. Fan Xian sat silently in the study alone. After a long time he turned around and gazed at the thick curtains. With concern he asked, Are you okay? The shadow was indeed a shadow. Floating away from the curtains, he shook his head and said, Yun Jilan is heavily injured. He's not dead. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. He knew his intuition was right again. What happened? Yun Jilan risked his life to break into a courtyard to the side. It should be the property of the Ming family. This time he didn't come alone. There were also a few of his disciples in the courtyard, so I retreated. The shadow's words did not have any emotional fluctuations. Fan Xian asked, The Ming family? Dongi? How powerful are the people who came? 2 9th level and 3 8th level, the shadow replied. However, Yun Jilan won't have any power for half a year. The anger in Fan Xian's eyes flashed and was immediately hidden. Faintly he said, then there's a 9th level and 3 8th level. It looks like Dongyi really thinks highly of me and has put down a lot of capital. *CK. Where did all these aces pop out to play wholesale? The shadow didn't understand his words, but he could hear his anger. He replied, they have already left that courtyard. Fan Xian stood up and sank into deep thought. If he wanted to investigate the matter of the palace treasury this time in Jiangnan, he would, without question, have to flip over the Ming family and cut off the flow of money between Xinjiang and Dongyi. Of the power the Ming family had, Xinjiang itself did not have enough martial power to contend with. The only thing they could rely on were the many aces in Dongyi that could be packed up. Killing an official of the court, particularly someone like Fan Xian, sounded difficult to imagine. Presumably, the Ming family would not risk the death of their entire clan to kill Fan Xian. However, if it really came down to a matter of life and death, given that crazy eldest princess personality, who knew what would happen? Once he thought of the possibility of facing an endless stream of 8th level and 9th level aces from Dongyi, no matter how powerful and daring he was, he still shivered. That was why he had the shadow make the first move. He would first pick the leader, Yun Jilan, and then lead the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau to spare no effort in killing the Dongyi people in the Jiangnan water villages. If Fan Xian sat in the yamen and waited for the day the Dongyi assassins came, then he would be a complete idiot. The so-called best defense was to attack. Using the terror of the Overwatch Council assassins to deal with the terror of the Dongyi assassins was the correct move. As for Sigu Jian, that strange old creature, Fan Xian did not think his level would be able to alarm him. He suddenly felt a chill and thought of how lucky it was that Yun Jilan had not died. Brother Jilan, please live a few more months at least until the blind uncle's injuries are healed. The assault rifle could only kill, not save. Fan Xian awoke from his thoughts and said, take all of the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau and have the people of the 2nd Bureau cooperate in the investigation. As soon as these people show their heads, attack. You don't need to kill them, but you must chase them until their hearts are bitterly disappointed. Make them anxious all day and stop having any ideas about me. The shadow nodded and suddenly said without any rhyme or reason, the girl beside you is very powerful. It is not convenient for me to come often. Fan Xian nodded and said, I think the same as you. From now on, my safety is her responsibility, so there shouldn't be any problems. Also, you have to pay attention to your safety. Matters like revenge cannot be rushed. Right now, you are not a match for that great grandmaster. The shadow paused slightly and then turned to leave. However, there were 2 slightly wet footprints where he had been standing. With the shadow going around to stop and scare the Dongyi visitors, the safety around Fan Xian became a problem. This was also why he had waited until Haitang appeared before he was willing to make the decision to attack. At the same time, he no longer cared about being tracked by others. Firstly, it was to borrow Haitang's power and his Sakuraji Hana's murderous gaze to create an opportunity for the shadow. Secondly, the shadow had left and Haitang had come. He still had a superior 9th level ace at his side. Working with the Tiger Guards, there would not be any problems with his safety. Most importantly, with this girl at his side, no matter which power in the world, if they wanted to touch him, they would have to consider the powerful national power of Northern Qi and the bald great grandmaster Ku He. Furthermore, Duo was much cuter than the shadow. Not only could they chat and bicker, but they could also be classmates at night and copy each other's study notes. Fan Xian laughed shamelessly. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 342. First of all, to celebrate the success of the clickbait title. Actually, the title of this miscellaneous article should be, Everything About CC Monthly Votes and Qing Yunyan. But I thought it was not sensational enough, so I changed it to this. I said a few days ago that I would write something to express my attitude and explain things when I have time. Everyone here is busy, and I think you don't want to see me being long-winded, so I immediately went into the main topic. First, about the CC incident. I hope that the debate about this matter will end. There is never a dish in this world that can satisfy everyone's preferences, and I admit that I don't have that ability. But I still want to clarify that I wrote this because the story needs it. Of course, there is no external interference and naturally I will not correct it. I think I am a very gentle person, but I have always been a little stubborn when it comes to writing stories. Please forgive me. Second, about the book review section, please maintain harmony. Discussion is fine, but personal attacks are not allowed. It's fine if you attack me, I have repeated it many times. Anyway, I am thick-skinned, right? It is a bit of a headache for the brothers and sisters who read the book to attack each other. We are all here to have fun, so why make it unpleasant? Regardless of support or opposition, I hope that everyone can express it in a more gentle manner. Of course, this matter has already faded, and it seems stupid and boring for me to bring it up again. But I have never had the chance to say it, and I always feel uncomfortable holding it in. Please forgive me. Third, I am personally against the practice of using other books as targets when commenting on a book. For example, if everyone likes this Qing Yunyan, it is my honor, but please do not attack other books and authors. From a moral point of view, this is not a good thing. From a moral point of view, as someone who works and earns money in this circle, I am also very afraid of offending people. Especially since I like to read books at Qidian, I am a loyal reader of many books. When I saw you criticize the people who read that book, I wanted to cry. I thought that it was indeed a good book. As for using other books to despise Qing Yunyan, although it is the freedom of the book review section, I have the right to be unhappy. Fourth, about the monthly votes. I have never expressed my attitude towards the monthly votes. Today I will take this opportunity to say, I like the monthly votes very much. The monthly votes represent honor and money. Any normal person will have a normal degree of vanity, and I am no exception. I like the monthly votes very much. Then why do I rarely solicit monthly votes? In the end, there are a few reasons. First, I don't think I write fast enough. If I get addicted to canvassing for votes, I'll be too happy to see my ranking climb up. I'll try my best to write, but if I write too much in a day, the quality will always decline. This is not a hypocritical statement, it is the truth. Everyone can see that whenever I write more than 7,000 words in a day, I always seem a little bloated, except for those chapters that are truly surging with ideas. Including the second chapter on the chrysanthemum, sword and wine, which has more than 10,000 words. At the end of the chapter, I said that I was very proud, but an old friend in the Dragon Kong expressed his bewilderment, saying that this chapter is only so, why do I have to be proud? Actually, the reason was very simple. That day I had written so many words in a chapter, but the quality was still maintained at an average level or above. That was why I was so pleased with myself. This also proved that it was difficult to maintain quality when the number of words increased. Second, the reason why I rarely solicit monthly votes is that I am very lazy, extremely lazy. This is not a hypocritical statement, I am indeed lazy. To look at the monthly votes every day and canvass for votes for me is very stressful. Third, sometimes I forget. I forget at the beginning of the month, and then I pretend to forget and sneak around until the end of the month or sometime when I find out that I'm still in the top 10. I am overjoyed and quickly canvass for votes again. In summary, I am really a bastard. Although I never object to authors adding votes when I read a book, I also know that some of my friends don't like to see these things, so I have a headache. If nothing else happened, perhaps I would continue like this until the end of the book. But a few days ago when I read Yi Ming, I found out that the author was actually canvassing for votes for me. I felt a little embarrassed. In the book review section, I also found out that some friends said, if you don't canvass for votes, your ranking won't go up, then wouldn't we have voted for you for nothing? In the VIP forum, I also saw a few of my old book friends constantly canvassing for votes for me. On Qidian, I found a book called New York Swordsman. The author actually gave Qing Yunyan a direct train, but I don't know the author at all. This feeling is really embarrassing. So, I want to make my attitude clear here. I like monthly votes like money. From next month onwards, on the 1st, the 15th, and the last day of every month, I will be canvassing for monthly votes. I won't explode, I won't add more chapters, I will just sincerely ask for votes. I don't expect any extravagant results, but I have to at least show the right attitude. This is a matter of the heart. Fifth, after talking about monthly votes, let's talk about Fan Xian, who I love and hate at the same time. What kind of person is Fan Xian? I now admit that what the fat tabby cat said makes sense. I have wrapped too much sugar around him, to the point that some readers mistakenly think that he is a good person. No, he is not a good person. After Caesar ended, I swore that I would never write a good person again. But, in reality, he really is a good person. Oh no, I'm going crazy. Actually, the outermost layer of Fan Xian's image is a layer of glittering paper clothing. Underneath the paper clothing is a very glaring mustard that makes people cry, underneath the mustard is a greasy sweet butter, and underneath the butter is a bitter poison shell. In the middle of the shell there is a smear of light. People are complicated. To the people of Qing, they can only see his glittering appearance. To Fan Xian's enemies, they can see the spicy mustard underneath the golden clothing. To the emperor, he seems to have discovered that Fan Xian is still sweet and nutritious butter. To Qin Pingping and Fan Jian, they think that the poison shell mixed with butter is the real Fan Xian. Haitang can't see what Fan Xian is, but she firmly believes that the core of Fan Xian is the light. Cici doesn't care what the young master is. She only knows that the young master in front of her is the god of light. Wanner and Fan Ruoruo don't care. They only know that Fan Xian is Fan Xian, whether he is poison or butter. In fact, even Fan Xian doesn't know what kind of person he is. In the whole world, only everyone and I know. This is a fact that we should be proud of. Don't expect Fan Xian to have a goal in life. Don't expect him to completely understand himself. Don't believe that he is a perfect person who takes every possible possibility into account. He will still be lost. As a man in his 30s, he has been pretending to be young for too long, and he has really entered puberty again. Who knows where the end lies? The Fan Xian of today loves glory, splendor, and wealth. He needs to satisfy his moral conscience. He looks forward to family and friendship. He likes beautiful women. In fact, looking back at ourselves, who can be sure what kind of goal we have in life? Fan Xian is like most of us. He muddles along and only looks at what is in front of him. He makes sure that every day is wonderful. This is the so-called happy life. Of course, some of his ideas are more stubborn than others. Because he is too afraid of death, he doesn't care about letting others die. Cold-bloodedness is formed in this way. Today I will continue recommending books. I don't believe in heresy. I don't know the authors of these 3 books, but I like them very much. The first is Magical Outfit. This book is well written. It's just that the scenes between the volumes are a bit fragmented. Overall it's great. I like 47. Let's go and assemble the little JJ. The second book is Helping Leisure Stories. As I think about the trip to Jiangnan, I read Helping Leisure Stories. It's very satisfying. I really don't know the author, but I really like that cute zither player. Especially when I read it, I realized that the author was also reading Qing Yu's Year. Suddenly I felt my face light up. The third book is Living in a Different World. I don't know how to fish, but I like watching him write about fishing. It makes me yearn for it. I want to go to Xinjiang and buy a small mud house to live in. I went to Baidu to search for gills, and only then did I find out that it means shrimp. I sincerely hope that the author will continue fishing to the end. Even in the future, when he has free time to open a bank or fight a war, I hope that Victor will not forget to take Her Majesty to the forest for SM Bison. 7th, I have finished writing. I wish everyone good luck in their work and everything goes well. I wish everyone a harmonious family. The elders are in good health and the pregnant women are in a good mood. It's the weekend. Everyone should be happy. I bow and leave the stage. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.